He can be the light that illuminates the darkest corners of a novel and the shadow that hides terrible secrets. His innocence is deceptive, his potential is limitless. This carefree child you see now could become anyone, literally anyone, in this story. He can become a hero, bravely fighting for justice in a world of imminent destruction, starting from the commander of the royal knights who protect the kingdom, ending with a great magician who possesses all magical techniques and knows the most powerful spells. The little hero can even become the head of the criminal underworld that rules the world of shadows, and one should not forget about his dark side, and his innocent look can hide a calculating mind. The kid has endless potential, the star of all heroes. Perhaps he will simply become an ordinary person, in which case his fate will be intertwined with the fates of other characters. In this novel, he is the key to many doors, each of which leads to its own world, full of adventures, secrets, and unexpected turns. The little boy with huge blue eyes greeted the lady. The weather was wonderful outside today, and it was a beautiful morning. Right in front of the heroine stood that same boy, whose life was like a pebble thrown into water, causing ripples that spread ever further. But the heroine had to answer this charming child in a less than sweet way, and his lazy face in the morning made her feel incredibly stupid. Large tears appeared in the boy's carefree eyes, and he clearly did not like being spoken to so rudely. The lady asked the young gentleman to get out of her sight as quickly as possible, while the boy frantically tried to run away, asking for forgiveness. He slammed the door of the room in fear, and the stately red-haired lady in a scarlet dress was left alone in the office. Clutching her fan tightly, the lady began to feel nervous because she had frightened the boy again, just to think that she had to make that sweet face cry. The main character's name was Belinda, and a whole month had already passed since she found herself in this novel, and the worst thing was that she couldn't say what she wanted. Belinda's life was written down verbatim, and she had to say only the lines that the system suggested. The novel's heroine was Belinda Blanche, a lady with red hair, and her ferocity and depravity were hardly rivaled by anyone. She had an inexplicable, mesmerizing power about her, and she was the best villain, and had a bad reputation in the high society of the Xenos kingdom. The precious daughter of the house, Blanche, who owns the largest casino on the continent, always bathed in gold for her crimes, for they amused him much less. People would say exactly that about her, that the gods could give such perfect beauty to such a fierce woman, and that must have been their last mistake. Who would have thought that in this fascinating novel, she was nothing more than a minor character? After Belinda's accident on the road, one day she opened her eyes and said goodbye to her past life forever. That day, the lady realized she had found herself in a child-rearing game and had become the character destined to die over and over again to remove the player's sense of justice. And this insidious role fell to Lady Belinda Blanche, who one morning woke up in her bed and found herself in a new life. It might sound unreal, but she actually found herself in the game at one point. The game she was transported into could create a real hero, and it was briefly called Doki Doki. A parenting simulator game where you need to raise the main character, what to do with him, and also develop his special skills. The player is Ophelia, a fallen aristocrat who sought refuge in the kingdom, and one day she saw a strange dream. One cold night, she dreamed that a mysterious voice entrusted her with a child born under the star of heroes, whom she had to successfully raise. And so, Lady Ophelia ends up saving an orphan boy who was being abused by the daughter of a certain marquise. This boy is a child from a magical dream, born under the hero's star, the main character of the game. This game featured a cute red-haired Belinda who needed to complete the game mission anyway. The main character was perplexed as to why she became the daughter of this hated marquise and really wanted to be reborn as Lady Ophelia. According to the game's plot, Belinda dies anyway, and all because she tormented and abused the child her entire life. But the fact that she became Belinda did not mean that the heroine was ready to die exactly like her, because this was not her ending at all. According to the game's plot, which the main character remembered perfectly, Belinda met the main character when he began to serve her. And fortunately, since she hadn't seen him anywhere nearby yet, it seemed that she definitely hadn't met him yet. Since it had come to this, the heroine needed to try to live her life properly, and besides, she had no desire whatsoever to treat the child cruelly. The new Belinda decided to replay the plot and gently mock, and later send the child to Ophelia. Besides, Blanche's family was the richest noble family in this history, and she would be able to take care of the charming child, spending all her gold on him. While she was carefully thinking through her new plan, suddenly a loud crash was heard in the room. The frightened maid stood right next to the door, with a broken porcelain vase lying next to her. Belinda didn't want to scold the maid because she accidentally dropped the vase, and no one in this life is destined to make mistakes. The villainess decided that she should definitely smile at her so that the girl would not worry so much, but the maid knew her mistress very well. Belinda never expected that the girl would fall to her knees in front of her, and with tears in her eyes, admit that she had committed a crime worthy of death. Was it really so bad in this novel that the heroine couldn't understand how the real Belinda behaved if the maid was trembling with fear? She was definitely not ready to be such a villain, and decided that she needed to improve her reputation at least a little in order to make it before meeting the baby. So now the girl was preparing to put on her most benevolent smile in order to destroy her bad reputation as the biggest villain. Belinda asked the maid in a soft voice to raise her head, because she was bleeding directly from her forehead, and she wanted to see her wound. At that moment, the hated system sounded an alarm upon detecting dialogue that was inconsistent with the character's personality. A system window appeared in front of the heroine, but she had never seen anything like it even in the game. She asked the maid to raise her head again, and saw the incredibly frightened eyes of the young lady. And now this girl, who never dreamed of playing the role of a villain, will have to fulfill it. She touched the maid's face to make sure there was enough blood on her forehead, asking her to take a closer look. The system itself decides what the main character should be like, and even Belinda was shocked by the words just spoken. The maid kept banging her head on the floor to vent her anger at her mistress, and it looked too cruel. There was indeed a drop of blood running down her forehead, and the girl only prayed that it would satisfy the mistress, but in reality it was just madness. Suddenly, the main system window appeared in front of the girl with a new task in which she needed to find out who she was and where she was. The heroine was probably surprised by her sudden transfer into another body, but the system was ready to happily provide assistance so that no one would notice the substitution. And right now, she needed to complete the synchronization to become the perfect villain Belinda, and the heroine's perfect plan had just collapsed, and all the heroine's words and her mouth turned out to be a real portal to hell. In Belinda's new life, everything was too strange after her rebirth. She just wanted to be alone and asked the servants to leave her alone. Unfortunately, Belinda could not control her speech, and every threatening word of hers burst out of her mouth with the force she called it, and the servants ran away in fear. The lady did not want to be like this at all, and did not want to continue living like this, allowing these demonic sounds to erupt from her mouth. This definitely won't work, and there must be some way to turn off this stupid translator so that the heroine can use her thoughts. It was the same system window Belinda had seen recently, and now it had suddenly appeared again. The system offered to complete the synchronization, receiving a reward for it, and the heroine knew that there was a way out of any situation. Looking closely at the system window, the girl wondered how she would be able to do this. Suddenly, a voice was heard outside the room, and someone was asking Belinda for permission to enter the room. These were the maids who right now needed to help their mistress get ready for dinner with a certain gentleman. The unknown gentleman's name was Shouvel. The girl tried to remember what kind of name that was and what kind of meeting awaited her. That's right, Belinda's main character had an older brother who was a respectable lord of this empire. All she knew was that one small fact: his name was mentioned once in the game's plot. If the heroine wanted to learn more about Belinda's family, she needed to gather as much information as possible at tonight's dinner. Soon the mistress's preparations were ready, and the maids carefully adjusted my lady's dress so that she looked, as always, simply impeccable. The image exceeded all her expectations. Lace, like black branches, wrapped around her waist, emphasizing the fragility and sophistication of her figure. As the main character thought, it was not for nothing that she turned out to be so beautiful, but to see such a luxurious outfit in person was simply amazing. Belinda may be the biggest troublemaker in the entire kingdom, but she is also an irresistible beauty who keeps up with the fashion world and all the latest trends. Her hobby is indulging in luxury, and her specialty is getting drunk and making scenes at social parties. With looks like hers, whether people liked it or not, she still attracted attention wherever she went, and the gossip magazines couldn't get enough of what they wrote about her. The new Belinda didn't want to live like this and didn't want to go through all this headache any longer, so she decided to change her image right away. She looked at the black dress with admiration. The black tones made her appearance look even more gloomy. Of course, the dress was simply incredible, but now the heroine decided to wear another one, brighter and more lively, because she would have to leave a good impression on her family. The lady appeared before the gentleman in an exquisite, soft pink dress, and this was her first appearance in her new leading role. For some reason, the huge living room was incredibly dark, and all the maids bowed their heads low as they greeted their mistress. The venerable young man sat at a huge table, asking the girl to sit down, and he had been worried for some time that she would not come. The man was Belinda's brother, named Shouvel Blanche, and he was eagerly awaiting the opportunity to see his sister and talk. To be more precise, he was just the main villain's cousin, and she had a special relationship with him. Belinda once lost her parents in a terrible accident when she was still a very little baby. Her uncle, the Marquis Blanche, took pity on the unfortunate little girl and eventually adopted her and raised her as his own daughter. His affection for the little girl was so great that he loved this sweet girl much more than his own son. Because of the Marquise's loyalty, Belinda could not hide her perverted nature and never tried to restrain herself, considering all people mere mortals. Yes, apart from the loss of her parents at a young age, the new heroine and the main villain had absolutely nothing in common. For Shouvel, she was just a younger sister who had brought shame on their family name and who had also stolen their father's attention, and it was clear as day that this man had no good feelings for her. The young man couldn't help but notice her new dress and admitted that the bright color suited his sister very well, and thanks to her, even the mansion itself became brighter. Shouvel said with a sweet smile that this dress really suited her perfectly, and it was the first time he had seen her in such an outfit. He just called the villain by the affectionate name Belle, and it turns out that brother and sister are much closer than the new heroine assumed. Despite the young man's charming smile, Belinda was sure that he definitely hated her and could call him a worthless insect. The villainess suddenly screamed, did she really give him permission to call her by her name so casually? And it seemed that in 1 second Belinda completely went crazy. The young man was frightened and immediately apologized, but the girl could not control her speech, which was a programmed system. Things were really bad, and Belinda hastened to shut that worthless mouth with a piece of meat to begin with. She sat in great anticipation of the Marquise's arrival, so that he could try to do something about this awkward, uncomfortable atmosphere. Suddenly, the atmosphere became even more terrible when the young man opened his mouth to speak his mind. After his question about what had upset his dear beloved sister, the heroine suddenly felt uneasy in a second. Her cousin stood right next to her, eager to hear the answer to his question, which probably had another meaning hidden within it. The young man even decided to let his cousin off the hook for not wearing a morning dress and instead showing up to the meeting in bright pink clothes. It turned out that only 1 single day had passed since her father's funeral, and only now did the heroine realize that the black dress was a mourning one. And Belinda certainly didn't expect to hear that the Marquis, whom she had been waiting for all this time, was already dead, and his funeral had taken place just yesterday. Shouvel put his hand on the lady's shoulder and addressed his sister in a sarcastic voice, so unpleasant that the girl felt uncomfortable. It was true that his father had died, but the young man insisted that it was too boring for him to fall into despair simply because of his death. The young man stated that the girl should have at least continued to resist, and it would have been much more fun for him to break her this way. Belinda had no intention of playing her hated cousin's games when suddenly a loud crash was heard in the dining room. A red scarlet stain appeared on the exquisite velvet jacket of her cousin, who certainly did not expect anything like this. The maids started screaming in fear the young master was wounded, and they asked someone to help stop the bleeding. In fact, the villain just did absolutely nothing. It was ordinary wine, and her cousin decided to present it in a completely different light. Drops of wine were running down his jacket, and he was writhing in indignation to show that his sister did not respect him enough. The butler immediately ran up to the young man, intending to call a doctor, but the cut was really not that deep and he was completely fine. Shouvel pretended his sister was a terrible villain, admitting he heard that the lady left her maid to bleed to death in her room today. He claimed that the lady had grabbed the maid by the hair and slammed her to the floor this morning, which was too much even for the most terrifying villain. The young man lied openly to his sister's face, while the maids whispered behind her back that their mistress had truly gone crazy. Shouvel suggested telling the story of how the villain wounded the young gentleman with a knife, but the Marquise loved the young lady very much, and she did not even have the honor of wearing a mourning dress. Everyone considered the young Marquise poor and unhappy, and now everything became perfectly clear to Belinda. In this terrible house, she did not have a single ally. The Marquise's only relative unfortunately passed away, her only brother was a desperate psychopath, and the main character was not born with a golden spoon in her mouth, but only with an imitation of one. After a terrible time with her brother, the lady decided to read the newspaper about how Belinda Blanche made a scene in the jewelry boutique. The newspapers were full of stories. A generous brother paid compensation to the boutique owner on behalf of his sister, a good-natured brother covering the back of a naughty sister. Belinda considered this terrible man a real psychopath because all this time he provoked her and invented crimes that she did not commit. There must definitely be reasons why Belinda was so hot-tempered, and the heroine tried to guess. In fact, in her new life she wanted to get along with the local family, but unfortunately everything turned out quite differently. In her past life, the heroine lost her parents, and because of this she had to live with her aunt. And she always had to tiptoe around there in her house, even after she graduated from high school, and then she decided to run away and live on her own. The girl worked tirelessly every day, but now there was no point in going back to the past. It was more important to sort out this situation. Last night, Belinda managed to test the damned Belinda translator, and it was good that it worked without deviations even in your written request. The translator could not be activated if there was no one around the main character and no one could hear her. However, she was never able to find out in detail how to increase this synchronization. Most of the reasons for the death of the main character Belinda were connected with other heroes, patrons of the other world. The patrons recognized the protagonist's talent and helped the player, while at the same time demonstrating their affection. They punished Belinda for her cruel treatment of the protagonist. If the heroine continues to spew insults at the protagonist, she will definitely be killed at any convenient opportunity. In such a situation, there was certainly a choice better than just running away. The heroine was very sorry that she would not see the Marquis, but now her salvation was a priority. The headmaid entered the mistress's room and, after asking for forgiveness, told the mistress some important news. The heroine was afraid that perhaps the lady could hear her words, but fortunately she came to tell that the mistress had a new servant. Her personal maid quit, and no one could find a suitable replacement, so the headmaid brought in a child to serve her. In the room stood a little boy, an orphan, whom the young master had taken into his home to help poor families. Belinda couldn't believe how this little angel could watch her, especially since the boy had never had a family. This may be the novel's main protagonist, but the main character certainly can't be so thin and shabby. Belinda decided to turn to the game system, wondering if anyone was going to give her any clarification. She sat waiting for the coveted pink window to appear, but as luck would have it, nothing happened. This maneuver didn't work right now, the system window didn't appear, and Belinda had no choice but to talk to the boy. She asked the boy to show his face so she could see closely what kind of hero she would now have to deal with. This boy looked like a real angel who came down from heaven, with a huge soul and good intentions. He was incredibly cute, like a little hero from a fairy tale, and the villain was even afraid to open her mouth so as not to say something terrible. Black hair like a raven's wing, gentle eyes like a puppy's, with flower petals swirling in them, and in reality, the main character turned out to be much more attractive. The boy looked like a cute puppy, and Belinda couldn't believe how such a charming creature could exist. The maid said that the lady could safely entrust the work to this child, who from that day on should look after her. She immediately left the room, leaving the lady alone with the boy, and Belinda certainly did not expect her to leave so suddenly. Sitting opposite the boy, the heroine decided to try to talk to him, but as soon as she opened her mouth, all the sweet phrases turned into real horror. So instead of asking how old the boy was, the heroine rudely called him a small fry and asked how long he had lived. The little boy turned out to be only 9 years old, and he looked with incomprehension at the new mistress, who looked like the most evil witch. Belinda even had to cover herself with a fan so that the boy would not be frightened by her frightening facial expressions, and she had to control her face. If the boys are only 9 years old now, that means there are about 6 months left until the start of the game. In 6 months, when he turns 10, he must meet Ophelia, who once ran away to the kingdom. It was truly an incredible relief for Belinda. Now that she had seen the boy's face, she could leave without any doubts. But if she's going to run away right now, the boy is unlikely to be able to live a happy life until he meets the main character. She silently looked at the boy and tried to understand what she should do, because most likely now she would have to stay next to him. The young gentleman knew how to clean well, and he also knew how to carefully repair cracks in wooden floors. He boasted that he could make any furniture even brighter and cleaner, and could also hang out laundry without interruption. And with all his little bodies trembling, the boy confessed that he was ready and would do anything for his new mistress, just so as not to be left on the street again. He was ready to become a useful, reliable assistant for her, and really wanted the lady to give him at least some work in this house. After the previous heroine left her aunt's house, she had to work to earn a living, thus living a worthless life without even having any hobbies. And in this harsh reality, the main character was her only joy, which brightened her life on cold evenings. So if she just runs away to save herself, this action will ruin the boy's future, and she will definitely regret it for the rest of her life. She had only 6 months left before the fateful meeting, and she had absolutely no other choice. In 6 months, she will never see this boy again, their destinies will diverge forever, and now she must definitely become responsible. She needed to hand the main character over to Ophelia safe and sound, and then part ways without any regrets, and that was her plan. Suddenly, a system window appeared before the lady's eyes, which did not appear when she needed it. The heroine was given the next task to give the hero's star a new name, and Belinda had to come up with a name for the boy right now. In the game itself, the first thing you need to do is give a name to your character. The heroine was given the title of Temporary Guardian, and she happily agreed to come up with a name. After all, even domestic dogs always have a nickname. In front of her stood a little boy who still didn't even have his own name. Belinda decided not to think about it too much, but she never imagined the day would come when she would be able to say it out loud. The lady came up with a name and wanted to call the boy Leo, but as soon as she opened her mouth, she said the not very nice word, little rat. The boy looked at his mistress in surprise, and he definitely hadn't misheard. She had just called him a little rat. She wanted to call him by the beautiful name Leo, but the hated game forbade it. And no matter how she tried to enter a different name in the new player field, the hero's star always received the same name, Ratty. The lady couldn't even edit the word, and the system itself sent the suggested name for the boy. She wanted to name him Leo, so that he would grow up strong and brave like a real lion and become a wonderful person. The villainess burst out laughing and declared that the name Little Rat suited him perfectly because he was as mangy as a rat. She tried again and again to call the boy Leo instead of the terrible word, but the system constantly translated and the ridiculous name Rat came out of her mouth. Therefore, it is not possible to edit the name, and the system asked the villain to behave as befits her age. Her filthy mouth had ruined everything again, and Belinda couldn't even call the boy by the name she had chosen. Belinda was so angry that she sent the hated translator, as well as the entire game system, to hell. She was definitely not ready to ruin her good mood because of such stupidity, so she asked the little rat to follow her. Now she had to become his mistress, and the heroine had to give the boy his first task. After a hard day, the boy finally reached his bed and collapsed onto it like a huge, heavy sack of cement. His legs even gave way. He had absolutely no strength, and as soon as he closed his eyes, a terrible disaster appeared in his thoughts. On the other hand, he was relieved that in the end he had not been sent to an orphanage, and that this was surely how one should serve one's mistress. The first thing the lady did was send the boy to wash himself, declaring that now the whole room was dirty because of him. The boy carefully tried to obey Lady Belinda and polished himself until he shone with fragrant soap and a soft sponge. The lady admitted that she would not allow him to walk around with these sticks instead of arms and legs, and for the first time in his life the boy ate well. In front of him stood a small black cake, and the young gentleman had never seen anything like it before, thinking that it was stale bread. Looking at the angry face of the lady, he was ready to eat anything, just not to see her angry look. The young gentleman had eaten spoiled food many times before, but as soon as he put a small piece of cake in his mouth, he didn't believe that such a thing was possible. The delicious aromatic piece of chocolate cake turned out to be so sweet that the boy chewed it in silence for some time. This chocolate dessert melted in his mouth, and he ended up eating until his belly became nice and round. Lying in a soft, cozy bed, the young gentleman could not believe that always washing and eating well until you are full was really that very job. For some reason, the boy felt guilty, because if you think about it, he did absolutely nothing for his mistress. He even received an unusual name, the first in his life, and the boy was so happy that he even managed to shed tears. The director of the orphanage where the boy lived his entire life was a truly unpleasant man with a huge bald head. He called the boy "Hey you," and he was sure that was quite enough, and he had no intention of giving him a real human name. It even seemed to the young gentleman that he would live the rest of his days without a name, as the director once said. Today he has an unusual name. Now they call him Little Rat. This was the first name in his entire life that he was going to keep. Just think. The lady allowed him to work in the estate, gave him a name, and the boy thought, maybe the lady is scary, but she does not seem like a bad person. Tomorrow he was going to make every effort to help his first mistress, and he was ready to give his all despite the task. The boy dreamed of only one thing. Perhaps she would be the moment when he would become needed by someone in this huge world. His small eyes were already almost closed. He didn't even notice how the young man entered the room. It was another resident of the estate named Toma, who today became the roommate of the young hero. I slowly rubbed my eyes. The young gentleman said his name, and the word rat from his mouth really sounded strange. Toma was sure the boy would come home in tears after his first day of running errands for this witch, but he looked absolutely fine. Becoming a nobleman's personal servant immediately upon arrival was too strange, and the boy was actually lucky in a sense. But Thomas was not too pleased, because in his time the servants had to sleep in the stables, and he was ready to teach the new resident all the harshness of this life. He turned to the boy, saying that if he became a servant to the mistress, then he would definitely have a hard time. The little rat wanted to know what the boy meant, but he asked not to take his words into account, especially since it was only the boy's first day. He just warned him that he should get ready, and his story would not be the most pleasant. And since the gentleman was really so interested, Toma agreed to tell the whole truth, but in fact he had a completely different intention. At this time, the young gentleman was about to tell the boy a scary story, while the lady was thinking about how to take good care of the boy. The main villain was executed in public view in front of a crowd of people, and one day, dissatisfied people decided to carry out the execution. Most of the locals wanted the villain dead, but the young man had one last question he was going to ask before cutting off her head. The young man wondered why the girl was so cruel to this innocent child, and whether Leo was really just a child who could not refuse her. Before her execution, the main character Belinda only laughed while her neck was shackled with wooden shackles. The lady confidently stated that Leo was born to be walked all over, since she is a purebred aristocrat, so she is instinctively disgusted by the dirty blood of commoners. Hearing this answer, the young man only grinned, and it seemed unlikely that they would ever be able to talk again. On this day, Belinda was executed, and the young man who carried out the execution decided that letting the lady go without pain was his last mercy. This was one of the endings of the novel The Crown Prince's Unfaithful Knight, where the main character faced inevitable death. The new Belinda woke up in a cold sweat and screamed loudly in her bed, remembering the terrible dream. Luckily, it was just a terrible nightmare. Her neck is still in place, and her head was definitely not cut off. The dream really turned out to be just a nightmare. The heroine had accumulated too much stress over the past few days. Before she could open her eyes, she immediately saw little Leo sitting next to a bucket and carefully wiping her window, lived in the lady good morning. She asked why the boy was here so early, since the lady was still asleep. Just recently, I warned the boy at home, or rather, he warned him immediately, as soon as he considered it useless. He assured her that in the future he would have to work so hard that his fingers would wear out and bleed, and all just so that the lady would notice. Leo looked like an angel, harmless, and the villainess tried desperately to hold back her urge to cry, but she really couldn't stand the sight of Leo working. If she says something now, the young master will definitely be upset, but people will misunderstand and think that the lady is bullying the child. Belinda decided to nip things in the bud and turned to respected translators to ensure they wouldn't misrepresent her words. She asked Leo to never do anything again, and the young gentleman was completely at a loss because his roommate was saying something completely different. The young gentleman even offered to do some other work instead of cleaning, but the villainess confidently repeated only one thing. So that the boy no longer dared to do anything else, he just sat in the corner and sat there, calmly, without doing anything. The villain asked him to just rest, but for some reason Leo looked like this when she didn't give him work, then stole candy from him. Leo hesitantly asked if he could at least make the bed so he could be of some use. He suggested shaking out all the blankets and putting them back on, since his new friend had clearly made it clear that the lady above would return him from the house. Belinda's inner world was torn apart, and she could not feel at peace at all in the body of a villain. Something was clearly going wrong here, and the heroine was trying to figure out how she could avoid forcing the child to work and still fulfill the game's plot. It turned out to be much more difficult than she had imagined because she couldn't act real. With great indignation, she nevertheless allowed the boy to move the bed, warning him not to leave a speck of dust on the bed. 5 days later, the boy already looked more cheerful, but Leo certainly didn't look like the cleaning fairy he liked so much. Belinda definitely felt that there was some misunderstanding here, but she was still afraid to ask the boy directly. Life with Leo must be different. This boy sees a villain every time. It looks like there is a witch standing in front of him. The boy ran happily across the courtyard of the mansion, and the heroine, looking at him, decided that she simply needed to keep an eye on him. Joyful Leo was incredibly happy because the lady gave him a new task. Now he definitely felt useful. He dreamed of becoming as cool as his roommate at home. From that moment on, he couldn't make a single mistake. Every time he looked at his mistress, he was still afraid of her, and the main villain of the novel still inspired fear. While the boy was looking at his mistress, he completely did not notice how he accidentally tripped over a small stone and was no longer able to stand. Lady Belinda continued to look at him from the second floor of the mansion. The boy was scared. She had been watching him all this time. Toma warned that if the lady noticed any misbehavior, she would not take her eyes off the boy all day if he made even one mistake. It would be the end for him. There was something more important for him now. The snow-white clean blankets lay on the ground right in front of the boy. The blanket quickly got dirty, and young Leo was ready to burst into tears right in the courtyard of the mansion. He carefully folded the blanket and carried it back to the maids as quickly as possible, and the whole way the boy was worried that he had managed to ruin everything. The thing he didn't want to do more than go back to the shelter was go back to the orphanage, and that was the only thing Leo was really afraid of. So he decided to go to his mistress and tell her the whole truth, that he accidentally tripped and simply dropped the washed blanket. He entered her office and, bowing his head low, asked the lady for forgiveness, holding the bed linen tightly in his hands. Suddenly the lady asked the boy to raise his head higher and look her straight in the eyes. She held in her hands a pair of gilded scissors that sparkled in the rays of the setting sun, and with these scissors she approached Leo. The lady declared that it was finally time to deal with the boy's head, and at that moment she looked like a real witch. As soon as Leo saw the sharp scissors, he became incredibly scared and didn't understand what his head had to do with it. Belinda admitted that she could no longer tolerate this disgrace, to be honest. This moment had been bothering her from the very beginning. She knew that sooner or later Leo would stumble, and there was only one problem: she just needed to tidy up his hair. Any hairstyle would suit Leo, and the villainess said with a grin that the boy could walk around without a head, just like before. Of course, she didn't mean it that way at all, and didn't want to frighten the young gentleman, who had already accidentally dropped the blanket and started crying. The baby cried loudly and promised to become a good boy and never make mistakes again, so that his mistress would not hate him so much. No doubt he thought the villain was going to cut off his head just because of the blanket he had just dropped. Belinda wanted to scream so that Leo could hear her, that it was just a misunderstanding, but unfortunately she had no control over her speech at all. And the next second the boy was ready to fall right onto the floor. He slowly closed his eyes and began to sway from side to side. Leo's life at the orphanage wasn't easy. The director would send the boy to prison every time for the slightest misbehavior. Each time he called him a useless brat who didn't know how to make a living and was always lazy. One day, one of the boys saw that Leo was sleeping in another room and immediately reported it to the principal, calling the boy a real lazybones. The director sent him to a cold dungeon until the morning, so that the boy would have time to think about his behavior and laziness. Leo screamed and cried to be released from prison, but the director never listened to an innocent child and did as he saw fit. Salchishka complained to the director about Leo, saying he had soiled his blanket, and the brazen deceiver's name was Chiron, who allegedly couldn't calm down for a long time after that. In the dark, lonely room, Leo peered through the crack and was sure that if he were that boy, he would never have thrown a tantrum. All his childhood he dreamed of a mother, a loving family, warm care and delicious food, but unfortunately, Leo never had this. He dreamed of becoming the best child in the whole world, if only he had the opportunity to experience the warmth of a family with loved ones. Leo had to call a doctor, who suggested that the boy was probably experiencing severe stress due to the sudden change in his environment. Moreover, the doctor warned that Leo looked too exhausted due to lack of sleep, and all this spoke of his bad life. The doctor asked the lady to give him some medicine today and to monitor the boy's condition further so that he could recover in a calm environment. Belinda never imagined that the boy could faint so suddenly due to lack of sleep or severe stress. While the lady was sitting by his bed, she decided that right now it was necessary to call up the system window to check the child's health. The heroine immediately received a notification the boy's stress level was off the charts, food would cause complications, and the hero needed proper rest and nutrition. Belinda couldn't believe she hadn't noticed his true state all this time and had been too inattentive. Perhaps I should have been more careful and not scared the child to death with my villainous statements and facial expressions. And now the lady needed to figure out how to increase the speed of the damned synchronization, or make sure that she and the boy would not cross paths often and that she would not cause him stress. She'll have to come up with some ideas, but if we were to guess, she didn't even see the full ending of this game and has no idea what will happen next. The game had many endings. They depended on the story route, the game was updated with endings every month, but the real ending was sad in that no one else could get through it. However, Belinda was sure that she could take care of this unfortunate child for 6 months. It seems she was just too naive. Perhaps she needs to change her plan right now so that the boy can get better as quickly as possible. Leo muttered something in his sleep, and the lady approached him to check if the young gentleman had woken up. Before he could come to his senses, Leo burst into tears and said that he was very sorry after what happened. He felt too guilty. But it turned out that the boy was still fast asleep. He was just talking in his sleep. It seemed like the tit was a real nightmare for him. Leo was covered in cold sweat, calling for his beloved mother in his sleep, and he couldn't wake up from this terrible dream. Belinda looked at the boy with fear, realizing that he missed his mother incredibly and that something terrible might have happened in his childhood. She reached out her hand to touch the baby, but he continued to loudly call for his mother in his sleep. He was trying to grab something with his hands. He was probably dreaming of his mother, whom he was hugging with all his love. The villainess looked at this with great trepidation, inner experiences, and she blamed herself because she did not keep an eye on him. The only adult Leo could trust right now was her, and Belinda was only just beginning to realize that. The truth was that the heroine was afraid to be with herself. She was afraid that she would also be caught and killed, just like in the game. Right now, the baby was still just a child, just a 9-year-old boy who missed his mother so much. And all this time, Belinda did not even suspect or notice anything like that. Of all people, only she could help him. She carefully took the boy's hand and felt very sorry for him. All this time, she had been a cowardly adult heroine. Belinda promised that until the boy met a real guardian who could raise him properly, she would protect him no matter what happened. And now it no longer felt like a realistic game. It was the main character's second life, and everything else was in the past. She lightly touched his forehead with her lips, leaving only a light, barely perceptible kiss on the skin. A determination was born in her soul, which grew stronger with each passing second. She promised to take care of Leo, to protect him from the dangers and injustice of this world. She will become his mother, teacher, friend, everything he needs. He will receive everything that she herself was deprived of in childhood, love, care, and support. The lady touched the rope to call the headmaid, and the next second there was a quiet knock on the door. The headmaid immediately came to the lady and asked why she had called her. Belinda sternly ordered him to forget the manager right now, but the lady was surprised that she really wanted to see him at such an hour. The role of the villain still helped her, and the heroine never repeated her orders twice, and every servant in the house knew this. While the young gentleman was still unconscious, his roommate was enjoying his solitude as he lay in bed. Toma immediately noticed the disappearance of the young master and dreamed that he would disappear from here forever. Suddenly, someone passed behind the door, and the young man thought that the orphan had returned, but his opinion turned out to be wrong. Perhaps Toma was just happy that this boy only got a small scolding and would probably never show up here again. Children without proper upbringing will never grow up normal, and the most important thing is that the beautiful villain of the novel understood this. She carefully entered the room where Toma was lying and declared that the boy had quite a luxurious life. The lady's appearance in the servants' room was too unexpected, and Belinda asked if it was really he who had told the boy all this nonsense. The boy jumped out of bed, not believing his eyes, because this voice really belonged to the lady who was standing in front of him right now. Belinda hated it when someone touched what was rightfully hers, and she told the boy so openly. She glared at Tom and asked how dare this rotten potato-like worm encroach on her property. There was absolutely no point in being cowardly. Now Toma was now serving Mr. Shouvel and had no intention of groveling before yet another aristocrat in the form of a mistress. The boy insisted that he had no idea what the lady was talking about, that he was completely unaware of what was going on. The villainess was a real villainess, and when she threw her leg onto the bed, her shoe was just a few centimeters from the young gentleman's most secret place. Toma never expected that the lady would actually go on the offensive, but this gesture really scared him. The lady asked menacingly, "He of all people should know what happens when they meet her eyes and she is not in the mood." Belinda decided to warn Tom once and for all that if something like this happened or happened again, she would not let it go. And next time his neck ends up under her thumb, she will definitely not let him get away with his lies. After talking with the young man, the heroine felt a certain relief, as if a heavy stone had finally fallen from her soul. The heroine didn't teach this brat a lesson. For nothing, she definitely had her eye on him because he dared to mess with her child. A system window appeared in front of the heroine, starting synchronization with Belinda's body. Nothing changed for a whole week, and then suddenly growth began. The servants were whispering, the mistress was back in her element, she was able to create a scene even in the servants' restroom. Now Belinda finally understood how the system worked, and she was ready to show that she was an even worse villain. And it was necessary to complete the synchronization as quickly as possible, so the heroine decided to use this amazing method. Every day she would shout at the servants relentlessly, warning them that they had to lay out a red carpet for her wherever she wanted to set foot. It was incredible. The synchronization numbers were growing at the speed of light, and for this the heroine simply had to behave exactly like Belinda. It seemed she had a talent for portraying herself as a tyrant, but still, the girl was most worried about the fatal ending. But for the sake of her Leo, she was ready to take on the role of a villain. The cousin was working in his cubicle and was informed early in the morning that Sister Belinda was causing huge problems again. For a while she behaved rather quietly, then the light flickered again, and the butler and the master tried to figure out what to do next. The young man asked to leave his sister for a while, since now there was absolutely no reason to bother her. Things with the will were gradually moving forward. A letter arrived from the notary, and the butler informed me that the will would arrive at the estate tomorrow. The gentleman considered this news to be simply excellent, because tomorrow it would finally become known who the family heir was. They have subjugated most of the house's commercial allies, so even if something goes wrong, they will happily follow the young master and be on his side. This was exactly what one of the heirs had been trying to achieve, and by this point they had been walking for too long, so the young man was almost celebrating his victory. From that very day on, the Blanche family's cousin played a certain role, the stupid older brother with no ambitions. He never raised his head and always remained on the sidelines, but today he was finally ready to take off his false mask. Once everything was settled, the young man wanted to find a suitable match for his sister, and since his sister couldn't stand children, he wanted to find a husband who couldn't have them. If Belinda ever had a child, they would definitely try to take the money from the family, and the gentleman did not want such problems at all. The butler understood his master perfectly and promised to find someone suitable for the role of the main villain's husband. It was an incredibly sunny and warm morning. The lady was sitting in the garden, and young Leo was fast asleep on a swaying hammock. There was silence all around, broken only by the singing of birds and the buzzing of bees collecting nectar from the blooming heathers. Little Leo slowly opened his eyes while lying in a hammock, and a small green leaf landed on his nose. As soon as he opened his eyes, he immediately became frightened because he saw the lady in front of him, and there was only one strange thing. Leo didn't even notice when he managed to fall asleep, and this hammock turned out to be incredibly cozy, and this is exactly what the lady was counting on. The lady asked how long the young gentleman intended to sit on the ground when he had that very example of etiquette before him. He climbed onto the chair, realizing that now he had to do like Lady Belinda and look elegant, like a true aristocrat. The boy crossed his legs and placed his small hands on his knees, straightening his proud posture, which truly met all the rules of etiquette. Belinda mentally called Leo the cutest kitten, but unfortunately she definitely couldn't say it out loud, because she had to play the role of the villain, but the boy noticed that the lady had just smiled sweetly. She called him a rat again and asked him to open his mouth. The boy looked worriedly at the only person he trusted. He felt that the lady would not do anything bad to him, despite her angry face, and would always treat him with care. Belinda asked him to open his mouth so she could spoon in a tasty treat that he had probably never tasted before. Never before had he experienced such a taste pleasure. His culinary experience had been limited to stale bread and watery soup, and so this delicacy seemed like a real revelation to him. His eyes widened in delight when he felt something crispy, yet incredibly melting right in his mouth. The very next second, the boy closed his eyes, clutched his face with his hands, and felt something sour and cold. It was his reward for being a responsible caretaker of the hammock, and Belinda asked the boy to eat every last spoonful of the delicious lemon ice cream. The gentleman liked the lemon aroma, and he happily devoured the ice cream, savoring every little spoonful. It seemed that Leo was absorbed by the taste of the aromatic ice cream, which it turned out penetrated into his very soul. Belinda wanted Leo to have a happy childhood, like bright colors on the canvas of life, but she knew she could never replace his parents. Leo thanked the lady for the lemon snowflakes as a gift and said he was preparing to leave that evening. Belinda couldn't believe what she was hearing. They were talking about leaving, which meant she had missed the mark again. All this time, the young master was ashamed of his mistakes, and he couldn't even shake out the blanket properly, but instead ruined everything. Leo felt guilty when he lay in bed all day, when he was sick. Even now, he just dozed off. He told the lady about this with all the sincerity of a child, feeling that this time he had not done enough. Leo admitted that during this short period of time he was unable to serve his mistress properly, and he could simply be called a worthless servant. Now the heroine finally understood why her look was so upset every time a new task was taken away from him. All this time he was just trying to prove that he was worthy of staying here. She patted the boy on the head carefully, but he was absolutely sure that the villain was about to start screaming at the whole garden. Feeling the gentle touch, the boy first closed his eyes and was even afraid to look at his mistress. All the not-so-villain wanted from him was for Leo to grow up healthy and never get sick again in his life. She looked at the young gentleman with sincere eyes, realizing that she was the only faithful person in his childhood life. Continuing to play her part, the lady stated that Leo was skinny and small, like a little rat, so he was of no use at all. Leo didn't expect what would happen next, but the lady only gently warned him that now he must eat everything the mistress gives him in order to grow big and strong. The boy asked if his main job was to eat a lot and grow big. Belinda decided to turn the situation around by promising that he would become a useful servant in the future, and when time passed, she would keep him by her side forever. As soon as Leo heard the word forever, he couldn't believe his luck that he would actually be able to stay and work in this wonderful house. And now he was ready to try incredibly hard to justify the expectations of the lady, whom everyone calls the main villain of the empire. Leo clenched his little fists and screamed, "Now he will eat a lot, so that in the future he will grow into a very big mouse." Belinda managed to somehow persuade the boy even in the villainous language, but she was glad that he finally understood everything. The boy smiled at the lady with a sweet, charming smile, and her soul felt incredibly warm. Her heart started pounding wildly, but she tried to hold on to her not-so-pleasant villainous smile so as not to scare Leo away. Suddenly, the headmaid approached the lady and asked Lady Belinda to pay attention to her. The headmaid rarely appeared before her eyes. This meant only one thing: something had definitely happened. She said that the young gentleman insistently asked him to sit down, and that it was Belinda's cousin who was being talked about. She didn't want anyone to ruin their precious time with Leo and asked her brother to come here himself if he really needed it. The head maid continued to insist that the lady must go, and her serious tone indicated only one thing: something urgent had happened. And the whole thing turned out to be that you placed a notary with the will of the late Marquis, which everyone had been waiting for a long time. A few days ago, the maids were working tirelessly at their duties, and they were so tired that they couldn't even stand on their feet. One of the girls had to get up before sunrise today, all for the sake of some purchase in a boutique, and the maids were discussing how they could no longer tolerate the abuse. They knew that when the young master was appointed as the new head, the Villainess would no longer be able to say a word to them, and soon the will would be made public. The maids were discussing the lady, and one of them was a new girl who certainly knew nothing about Lady Belinda's origins. As soon as the maids saw their mistress next to them, they became frightened and began to whisper among themselves so that she would not hear them under any circumstances. Belinda already knew all about the will and the inheritance, and she knew that everyone was now talking about her behind her back. For some reason, the heroine hadn't thought about this before, and only now decided to turn to the code of laws of the Xenos kingdom. It didn't matter at all what shares Shouvel got. Belinda still had no intention of staying on the sidelines. According to the laws of the kingdom, an unmarried daughter who is not the head of the family cannot inherit property exceeding a certain amount. They say that when a wealthy family breaks up, even the third generation survives. No matter what the law says, the lady should have been left with a decent amount of money. Guests, famous aristocrats, arrived in the reception room of Blanche's house, and this meeting was incredibly important. Lady Belinda appeared before the guests in an incredibly luxurious purple dress, holding her head up proudly. She noticed that there were too many onlookers here today, probably wanting to hear all the main gossip right now. The heroine understood that she needed to behave with dignity and not pay attention to manipulation, rumors, and distrustful looks. Shouvel approached his sister and admitted that it had been an eternity since they had last seen each other. The lady did not want to talk to him at all, but he asked her not to be so angry, and he heard that she got along well with her new servant. Despite his age, the boy copes with his duties perfectly, and on the one hand, it was nice to hear. In truth, her brother acted meanly. He deliberately sent Leo to completely destroy her reputation, so that she would torment the child. But even bad relationships in the family should not expose the poor child like that. The heroine absolutely did not want to talk to this man, but the young man only asked if she was ill and looked unwell. Belinda was no longer the silly girl who always followed her brother's lead, and now she would no longer fall for his tricks. Reputation didn't matter to her. She might as well use the opportunity to increase her synchronization level. Just like the noble and elegant Lady Belinda, she needed to punish this villain properly. Elegantly waving her fan, the lady prepared to express her opinion so that her brother would finally leave her alone forever. She wondered how this worthless creature dared to touch someone like her, the Empire's main villain. Perhaps the brother wants to disgrace his noble blood, but in fact, this is what he feared more than anything in the world. After these words, his face changed drastically. He began to blush very loudly, and Belinda watched his reaction with interest. This man was not the type to show his true colors so recklessly, or perhaps the heroine had just touched a nerve in him. Finally, the brother stopped with his requests and turned his attention to the guests present. He was definitely expecting the notary to appear, and with great respect he welcomed the gentleman to the estate so that everyone could hear his father's last will. The brother and sister stood near the table where the notary was holding the main will. Everyone else was listening intently. The notary began to read the will slowly, swearing in the name of the law to tell the truth and only the truth. Everything that is now going to be read aloud in the will represents the last will of the deceased, and the notary confirmed that there is no lie or distortion here. Throughout his life, the Marquis had made every decision to protect the honor of his family, and now he intended to pass on this responsibility to the next generation. In accordance with all traditions, the Marquis bequeathed the title of Marquis to his eldest son, named Shouvel Blanche. As was to be expected, of course, this is his own son, and only to him can he pass on the honorable title of Marquis. Belinda didn't care at all whether this brat became the head of the family, and she was never interested in the position of head of the house. The brother was self-confident now. Only one thing mattered: what share of the inheritance would belong to the heroine. The Marquis left his daughter a legacy of 100,000 gold pieces and the eastern extension of Blanche's mansion in the royal capital. The guests started laughing. The marks demanded a small amount. The extension was an abandoned building that no one had used for many years. Hearing about the money, Belinda became thoughtful because this amount meant too much to her. Judging by the local game economy, a month's stay usually costs 30 gold, and this was Belinda's imagination. The Marquis turned out to be generous, and the lady breathed a sigh of relief because now she could sleep peacefully. That wasn't all 3 mansions on Velvet Street, the famous forest on the territory of the Eastern Dune, and partial ownership of the beach, as well as ownership of a mine in the north of the territory and the entire contents of a personal safe that previously belonged to the previous head of the family. The above assets will be inherited as Lady Belinda's dowry, and with these words the notary finished his speech. The talk was about a marriage dowry, and to receive it, the heroine needed to get married, and do it as soon as possible. Judging by his brother's malicious grin, he definitely didn't like this idea. He was sure that everything would belong to him. Only now did he realize that even after his death, his father showed that he loved the little girl much more. Suddenly, a man in a black mask appeared at the meeting with a glass of red wine, whom no one knew. The young man appeared too unnoticed. He looked like a real aristocrat, and his clothes were incredibly luxurious. After the meeting, the heroine thought for a long time about the notary's words and about the property inherited under the pretext of her marriage dowry. If you think about it, that's a whopping 40% of Blanche's entire house fortune that should go to her. Moreover, the Marquis wisely arranged for a very tricky condition. Lady Belinda's future husband would be chosen according to her wishes, and the inheritance would be issued if the married life lasted a year. If the lady dies in an accident before the dowry is due, all assets will be released to the public. It was truly a huge relief. Thanks to these conditions, the heroine could not be afraid that her brother would want to harm her. Why didn't Belinda take advantage of this opportunity? Given her character, she would have easily found a suitable man and got married. The heroine couldn't understand what the girl had been thinking about all this time. The head maid approached her and asked the mistress to check everything. She decided to think about this a little later, and now she had to sort out the questions she had received. There was something more important for her now. The servants had prepared a new hairstyle and outfit for the young master, relying on her expectations. The boy looked incredibly cute, and now he looked like the Leo she knew in the novel. Leo didn't even know if he could accept these things, and perhaps he could misunderstand his mistress. Of course, this was not all the clothes that the lady offered, and Leo was in for the biggest surprise of his life. They had a bunch of outfits, enough for a full fashion show, and the lady shouted for the boy to try them all on. The first outfit was for walking. The bright yellow checkered pattern was the highlight, creating the feeling of walking through a sunny field. The next outfit was a play suit, the soft color palette reminiscent of cherry blossom petals in full bloom. The next look was just perfect for formal events. The highlight of this outfit was the 11 layers of ruffles. Belinda loudly declared that she wanted to buy all the outfits because she couldn't resist any of them. She asked to pack everything right now, wrap up all the cutest outfits, and decided to buy them all. Belinda felt her attitude towards money was gradually dulling, and perhaps it was time to stop there today. The lady noticed that the girl was regaining her senses and that she would probably be able to buy much less if she thought about it. She began to offer her other luxurious outfits, admitting that the lady had excellent taste. The heroine definitely couldn't resist the full costume set, which also included long leather boots and gloves. She asked the boy to try on the suit as soon as possible, and suddenly her synchronization was increased again. Suddenly, Leo became sad for some reason and turned to his mistress as if he felt guilty. Perhaps the heroine overdid it, and the boy began to think that she was simply making fun of him. And of course, in reality, everything was completely different, and the villain needed to make the boy understand that he was the best in the world. All the wonderful purchases were quickly loaded into the carriage, and the shop employees, with tears in their eyes, thanked the lady and asked her to return quickly. It was the first unusual day when the boy finally had his own clothes, and he would never walk around in rags again. Today, Belinda was walking with her sweet Leo. The weather was beautiful, and she wished every day could be like this. The boy was eating a delicious ice cream and suddenly noticed a huge building, asking what it was. If you think about it, this was the very place that the heroine had already known once. They stood near the kingdom's majestic temple, and now that Belinda saw it in person, it became clear to her that it was just as beautiful as it had been in the game. By the way, if this was a great temple, then one treasure should definitely be located somewhere here. Belinda finally found it. It was a huge sword, encased in a huge shard of ice. The heroes headed straight towards it to take a closer look at the landmark that was known throughout the empire. It is said that approximately 700 years ago, this sword was sealed in a coffin of eternal ice by the first king of the Xenos kingdom. A holy relic commonly known as the Light of Blessing. This religion is required to be obtained in the game to become a hero. This relic was priceless, possessed enormous power. In any case, the heroine decided to touch this sword. As soon as she touched it, the system issued a notification that she needed to get the sacred sword left by the first king and receive the title of hero. The system notifications were somehow strange, and the heroine read all the information and realized that this was complete nonsense. To turn the protagonist into a hero, you need to reach the maximum level in all characteristics: magic, endurance, divine power. Since magic and divine powers are opposites, it is impossible to raise 3 stats at once in a short period of time, which many players have been unable to cope with. However, since everything is different now, perhaps the heroine will be able to increase her characteristics before the original story begins. And Leo was incredibly delighted with the cold, very sweet cream, and was even afraid to eat it all at once. The Villainess kindly ordered the boy to eat absolutely everything, so that not a single drop of ice cream would remain. Strange thoughts appeared in Belinda's head. She understood perfectly well that in 6 months she would have to leave. On the one hand, she couldn't take everything that was happening too seriously, but on the other hand, she fell in love with this boy. She wondered if Leo would even want to become a hero and how his future would turn out. She didn't even think about it when she played. There are clearly defined good and bad endings, and she aspired to be a hero with a happy ending. This is the future she dreamed of for Leo, but not the future Leo will choose for himself. In this case, Belinda decided to reconsider all her rules and act as her heart tells her. If Leo is happy with any ending, that will definitely be enough for real joy for both him and her. After a pleasant walk, the lady returned with her little assistant, and the butler greeted them politely. She asked to heat the water for the bath so that she could wash herself immediately, but the butler warned her that something needed to be done before that. Right now, the lady has a guest waiting for her, but Belinda definitely didn't invite anyone today and didn't want to see anyone. This was some kind of nonsense. The lady's character was so terrible that she definitely could not have friends for such meetings. Perhaps this was some kind of gross mistake, or perhaps her cousin simply sent someone. In the office, in the rays of the setting sun, stood a venerable gentleman in a black mask and black robe. This gentleman looked mysterious and enigmatic, but his black mask added even more uniqueness to him. His voice was low and velvety. He immediately addressed the lady as soon as he saw her. Looking at the stranger, the girl could not understand who this man was, and there was definitely no such character in the game. His deep blue eyes reflected his aristocracy, and the lady asked who he was and why he had come to visit. The young man immediately apologized with dignity for the late visit. His name was Alan Fenedon, and he had been sent to the lady by His Serene Highness the Archduke of Valwachten. He had come to meet the young lady at his lordship's behest, and this meeting was likely to be important. Belinda never expected to have to talk to anyone today, but the mysterious look of this young man caught her attention. Come to think of it, she had seen the emblem in the game before, and she was trying to figure out who this person was. In one of the endings, there was a finale in which it was possible to join the Duke's Knights at home. If you add to all of Leo's characteristics his mastery of the ball, then you can see it. In the far north of the continent lies a vast snowfield, where a huge barrier stands, blocking the invasion of demonic creatures. The guards who guard this demonic barrier are the ducal house, and the Duke belonged to one of the most powerful families in the kingdom. Rumor has it that he always wore a mask to hide his ugly face, and 4 years ago in this story, he killed not only his parents. He also killed his elder brother's wife and child, and after this assumed the high title of Archduke. And now, right in front of her, stood one of the people from the ducal house, and it was unclear why he had come here. As expected from a subordinate of the demonic Archduke, his aura was simply murderous. There is a rule that a northern knight must always wear masks outside the territory. Belinda wondered what business had brought this worthless knight from some backwoods country to come all this way. The young man sighed and realized it was better to get straight to the point because the villainess's speech was not very welcoming. His master wanted to get the Harrington mine, so they decided to offer the young lady a special deal. The mine was one of the assets that came as a dowry. Rumors spread very quickly, and even suitors were found, although the heroine was not yet married. The lady asked to voice the conditions. Considering the entire route, she will definitely need to think about this proposal. She wanted to see how much she would be offered for the deal and how profitable it would be for her. The young man warned that the lady must marry the Archduke for a certain period of time, and then separate by mutual consent. It even looked like a marriage proposal, but to put it simply, it was a regular sham marriage. A year later, when the lady inherits her dowry, she will simply need to transfer ownership of the mine to the Archduke. But his lordship only needs the mine, and the gentleman is not going to demand anything more from the villainess. To be honest, this was quite a tempting offer for the heroine, and she thought about it for a while. The share of the property is considered a dowry. She will not be able to touch this money before the wedding, and there is a law that the bride's entire dowry becomes common after the wedding. The gentleman still has a chance to take half of her property, but instead he must make a lucrative offer. Perhaps he really has something in mind, wants to somehow get everything, and besides, this deal is with a man who is called a demon. The lady decided to inquire what kind of person the Archduke was, and she had heard only terrible things about him. The boy with the snowball said that the gentleman definitely had all his limbs. This answer was too funny. He also knows how to shake hands, maintains discipline, and takes a responsible approach to fulfilling his obligations. This information did not help Belinda at all. She wanted to know something more specific, and she could not understand what was wrong with this ignoramus. Since he appeared here as a matchmaker, he must explain everything clearly: appearance, income, and everything else. Black hair, blue eyes, a neat nose and mouth. The heroine didn't even understand whether she was really being spoken to by artificial intelligence. She wanted to know how handsome his owner was, so that she could at least not turn up her face throughout her married life. The young man said only one word: his master is simply handsome, but Belinda wanted other specifics. His words sounded as if hesitant, which confused my lady a little because now she didn't understand anything at all. The unexpected young man admitted that this question was difficult for him to explain, and suggested that the lady had also heard rumors about his lordship. Rumors did indeed reach us. People said that this man was a real tyrant and despot. The young man might say that this is all a misunderstanding, following all the stereotypes and false rumors, but the Archduke is actually a gentleman, cold to others. The young man stated that all the rumors were definitely true, and he had nothing more to say about it. The villainess loudly slammed her hand on the table, announcing her important decision. She confidently admitted that she was ready to reject his lordship's offer because she knew absolutely nothing about him. She also warned that never, under any circumstances, should the young man act as a matchmaker to anyone else. The young man sat silently in the chair while the lady asked the servant to escort the man out immediately as the conversation was over. He continued to sit and wait. Belinda could understand what was wrong with this fool. Thanks to him, she came up with a great idea. She should propose such a deal to the other two nearby, asking how much they wanted to receive before the divorce. This was not all that the young man wanted to ask, and suddenly he approached the lady, tall and stately. He gently touched her chin, and Belinda looked in bewilderment at the young man who dared to touch her. Looking with his bottomless blue eyes, he asked the girl where she got this necklace. The lady wore a black necklace with a large flower pendant around her neck, and she didn't understand why he was asking about it. She waved her fan and hit the young man on the hand because for some reason he dared to touch her. He once again apologized for his rudeness, and the villainess screamed at him, asking why on earth he decided to behave like that. He scared her a little, and she thought that he wanted to take revenge on her for refusing his master. She didn't understand what was wrong with her necklace. The young man admitted that he definitely liked the design. The design of this item was quite ordinary. The heroine wore this necklace from the first day after her rebirth. What was more important was whether he really liked it. A lace necklace would hardly suit a manly man's neck. Therefore, the heroine was now completely at a loss to understand what this attractive gentleman needed. He offered to sell the necklace, but the villainess refused and asked the stranger to simply leave the room. Alan suddenly announced that he was going to stay in the capital for a short time, and this could only mean one thing. If the lady still changes her mind, she can contact him at a certain address, and he will definitely be waiting for a new meeting. At parting, the mysterious gentleman asked her to take care of herself after this meeting. The lady was left with completely incomprehensible impressions. The next day, the maid accompanied the mistress to an interesting place where she had definitely never been before. They stood near the very same outbuilding in which Belinda could now freely live and manage it. She asked the maid to open the door so she could look inside and understand what she was now dealing with. The building may look shabby from the outside, but inside everything was quite nice, and it was no wonder the heroine mocked Toma back then. She carefully invited Leo to come inside as well, while the frightened boy tried to gain trust outside. Everyone says this place is very strange, so the boy was incredibly nervous and looked around. Someone told him that scary ghosts live here, and that is why this place is called Too Mysterious. There are spirits and mythical creatures in this world, so there is definitely nothing strange about the existence of signs. While looking around the new room, Belinda noticed a drawn curtain and immediately decided to see what was there. The view outside the window was definitely not what she expected, and even the Villainess fell silent for a moment. She had, of course, heard about the beautiful view of the river, but no one had ever told her about this cemetery before. Indeed, the view from the window onto the cemetery was not the most pleasant, and the boy became even more frightened when he saw this. As it turns out, there was a time when Blanche's house was once poorer than the poor, forcing them to sell their property. Then an ancestor was born who had a clear talent for running her business, and the wealth that Blanche's house now has is the result of that ancestor's efforts. With a huge fortune, they bought up a lot of land around the house and built the current main building. But the only thing is, this place became a reconstruction and a cemetery where the ancestors sleep. Now the heroine could calmly take care of Leo without worrying about prying eyes, and the freedom in the annex was much better than in the main building. She realized that now a more luxurious new life could begin, and asked the boy not to stand with his mouth open, but to follow her. She showed him one of the rooms, and from that moment on, the young gentleman was to live here. The boy was scared. Would this room really be like the one in the orphanage? Scary and cold? What he was most worried about was that there would definitely be ghosts in this house, and he would no longer be able to live a peaceful life. He closed his eyes before the lady opened the door, praying that there were no ghosts in there. All the boy's fears were not justified. As soon as he opened his little eye, he saw something incredible. He saw a huge, beautiful, bright room with exquisite furniture, a bed, and outlandish curtains. He couldn't believe it. This was really the terrible cell in which he would now have to live. Looking around, Leo noticed that this definitely didn't look like a solitary confinement cell. It looked like the child's room that Chiron had spoken of. The boy asked the lady if she had gotten the room wrong because he couldn't believe he could be there. Belinda asked if the young gentleman was unhappy with someone, but she simply misunderstood his thoughts. It didn't seem like the truth to him at all. He couldn't believe that he could just stay in such a wonderful room. The lady did not explain anything more and admitted that she was tired, and the boy could do whatever he wanted today. Leo stood in the middle of the cute, cozy children's room and couldn't believe that he could really stay here. He gently touched the soft down blanket with his finger, which he had never had before in his life. He had no idea that a blanket could be so soft and pleasant, and that you could even lie down on it. Closing his eyes and gathering his strength, he finally decided to do what he had dreamed of his whole life. The boy collapsed onto a soft, cozy, clean bed that smelled of washed linen. He began to roll on it in different directions, feeling the pleasant softness on his body, and he was supposed to sleep in this bed. The boy's happiness was beyond words. The bed was incredibly soft, and he certainly hadn't had anything like it at the orphanage. He decided to get a good night's sleep before tomorrow, but since it was Lady Belinda's furniture, he knew he couldn't make a mess of it. That same evening, he lay down in his comfortable bed, closed his eyes, and sighed with relief. Leo felt a calm silence around him. He felt completely safe. He looked intently out the huge window. At the orphanage, everyone usually gathered in one room to sleep, but now he was completely alone in this beautiful room. It was as if he didn't even know how to behave, having lived his whole life in an orphanage where there weren't such wonderful conditions. Carefully opening the door, Leo decided to go out and look around, and suddenly saw an open door as well. A bright light was shining from the next room. The lady was probably there right now. It all seemed like a magical sun to him, and since he was a little scared, he decided to go into this room. There was a huge white canopy hanging on the bed, which hid the person inside. Mrs. Belinda was definitely there, and she saw the boy trying to enter her room. The lady settled comfortably on the huge bed, placing soft pillows in front of her, and was about to drink herbal tea. The mistress hadn't even gone to bed yet, and the villainess laughed, wondering if the servant hadn't dared to fall asleep first. The second mug contained warm, hot milk, and she offered the boy to drink it before bed so that he could sleep soundly. The heroine had a book in front of her, and she decided to give Leo the opportunity to experience its elegant reading. She asked the young master to be a good servant and listen carefully, and Leo, clutching the soft pillow, was determined. Once upon a time, in a certain kingdom, there lived a princess who was bewitched by black magic. The magic was so terrible, it was more like a curse that made you say the exact opposite of what you wanted to say. The princess loved everyone, but the words that came out of her lips were cold as ice, and every pleasant thought she had was replaced by a negative one. Her thank you sounded completely different and became something like, "Somehow you dare give me this trash." But the most painful thing in her life was her confession of her feelings to the prince with whom she had long been in love. She just wanted to confess her love, but said that she hated this man more than anything in the world. She was a person who embroidered handkerchiefs thinking about her prince every night, and afterwards was so upset that she couldn't swallow a bite. However, in the castle, from outside it, people believed only what the princess said out loud, and because of this, the prince began to distance himself from her. After the terrible tragedy, the princess could no longer say anything at all, and decided that her punishment would be eternal silence. Because there was not a single person in this world who would listen to the princess's true and sincere thoughts. This story was incredibly similar to Belinda's story, and every moment of it reflected reality. Everyone says that she is rude and cruel, but only he knew that the lady is completely different in reality. The boy felt, of course, that the villain could be very frightening, but still, deep down he knew that she was a completely different person. The lady stroked the boy's head carefully, and he felt incredible warmth and sincerity. No one else knows what the lady really is, and only the young master knew about it. So he was definitely sure that the villain was the most wonderful person on the council who gave him warmth. It was she who became the person he could trust and no longer be afraid of adults, and he was always ready to be on her side. The discussion of the dowry continued in Shouvel's office, and he declared that the old man had finally truly moved his head. In any case, he was now the official head of Blanche's house, and he had dreamed of this since childhood. Blanche had wanted to be the boss all his life, except for the part where a stupid woman with nothing but noble blood steals his gold. With the succession to the title now legalized, it is now time to discuss all matters with the royal family. Therefore, the young man ordered that we ask His Highness the Crown Prince what he thinks about charity projects. If a large sum is donated to the society, His Highness will certainly be interested in it. After the Marquise's death, he still clung to his leg, and the young man did not understand whether this girl had really been dear to him then. The son had no intention of indulging him, and even arguing again would have been useless, because his father had long since been buried in the ground. That evening, the villainess decided to take a hot bath to finally relax and think about the upcoming business. She thought about her cousin, and everything was as simple as pie. There was even no need to guess anything here. The game of survival is quite tough from Belinda's point of view, but luckily she now has at least a tidy sum of money on her. In the original story, Belinda dies, and no matter how careful she is, someone might stab her in the back. If only the heroine had extra lives in this game, she would have succeeded, but she had never thought about extra lives before. This thought appeared in her head unexpectedly, and even now she could not understand why she had never thought of it before. She decided to go to the game store, but access was restricted and temporary guardians could not use this feature. Still, this couldn't be called the end of the council, which meant she needed to somehow get permission. In the game, Leo's outfit was labeled as Madame Orland's work, and at the time, the heroine simply thought it was an unremarkable detail. The store actually exists, which means it definitely has premium items. Besides, there is some way to make what she needs, while paying a large sum of money. Of all the other things, there is only one thing that the heroine would really like to buy. A first-class healing potion that was said to be able to resurrect the dead, and it was called the source of all things. An unearthly thing, capable of even restoring lost limbs, the greatest creation of the skilled magician Viven. This item was indispensable even during the game. Thanks to it, the heroine managed to survive in particularly dangerous situations. Based on its description, the girl who created it must be a powerful mage named Viven. And if the lady's memory served her right, she was now in exactly the place she knew about. A huge queue formed outside the majestic temple this morning, but the priest asked people not to push and to stand one at a time. The poor lady thanked the Holy Father with all her heart, because today the church was distributing aid to all those in need. Belinda was here today too, and she was sure that she could find the magician because she often appeared here. It was okay. Even if she had to wait, she had no idea when Viven might show up. The priest turned to the girl and asked for forgiveness. There were too many people today, so they decided to close early, but someone didn't have enough pieces of bread. The heroine noticed the girl in the hood, from under which her face was completely invisible, and felt something. This man in a black robe and a strange hood, no matter how you looked at it, looked very suspicious among everyone. The Villainess turned to the girl, calling her a pathetic insect, and asked since when magicians beg for alms in the temple. It was indeed Viven. As soon as the priest heard the word magician, he immediately understood who she was. Legends say that magicians and priests never got along with each other, most likely because they believe in and use different powers. The priest warned her once again that there was no more food for today and asked the stranger to leave the area immediately. The lady said that she would have to drink water again today, but the mistress turned to her. Their conversation was not yet over. She had a strange look, as if this girl had really been hungry for a long time and needed help. Belinda asked, how about asking her for alms instead of asking the Almighty? The lady confessed that she could not accept such kindness from a stranger and felt completely insecure. The villain simply asked what kind of salad to make from fresh vegetables, or a warm stew with tomatoes over low heat. She deliberately started listing delicious treats to somehow attract attention to herself, and as soon as the stranger heard about the fresh steak with an incredible sauce, she couldn't refuse such an offer. She turned and grabbed the lady's hands, asking what she had just said. It was indeed a question of an incredibly tasty steak, and the sweet red-haired girl decided to ask for help. This steak did not turn out to be her magical dream, and after a while, when they arrived, a huge piece of meat was lying on the table. She couldn't believe that such joy had come over her. She was incredibly grateful to the lady for the delicious treat. This girl may have looked like a vegan, but she had a pretty good appetite, and if she had been born in Korea, she would have become a mukbang star. In the game, Viven appeared as a ghost, having lost all her colors, and her soul and body were completely black and white. The task associated with it is called the last regret of the unfortunate genius magician. The main task is to fulfill her dying wish. In the game, she was already dead, so the heroine could not even imagine meeting her alive, but this means that this is her only chance. She can save Vivi and also get her extra 8 lives to avoid having to share in the tragic fate. She politely addressed the lady, calling her redhead, because this girl's hair was incredibly red. Meteor beacon, nest of migratory twin birds, the lady asked if she had ever heard of it. This is the name of the magical items that are very popular these days in luxury stores, and it is said that they were created by the magician Bruno. But in fact, there was a huge secret hidden here, and the girl replied that she knew absolutely nothing about these objects. The villain was sure that she had to tell the whole truth, and now she needed to find out something. She asked the waiter to clear away all the dishes, but the girl began to get nervous because she had not finished eating yet. She also asked to put the bill in the name of this girl, although she herself offered to treat her, and now it was necessary to play the role of a villain in order to find out the whole truth. Vivian's mentor, the magician Bruno, will one day publish the source of all existence and be proclaimed its creator. In truth, every magical item he released was actually created by Viven. If Vivian's masterpiece hadn't been written about in the game, the heroine would never have known about it. Viven finally admitted that she made magical items, but she used her mentor's things to create them, so they are technically his creations. In this case, the villain suggested going and telling the chef who cooked her steak that it was delicious not because of the cooking, but because of the quality of the beef. She gave this example only so that the girl would understand that the creation of magical things really belongs to her. Viven lowered her head, sighed, and said that everything here is incredibly expensive, and it is very difficult to cope with some things. Vivian was an ordinary commoner, so she could not afford research equipment and turned to a mage. Therefore, in exchange for permission to study with him, she renounced all rights to her inventions and their distribution. The heroine thought that there must be some tragic story here, but her teacher turned out to be just human scum. The villain didn't want to hesitate any longer and offered the girl a deal, asking how much she was currently being paid. Vivian was a simple student. She was not paid anything at all. In return, she received only room and board. Belinda asked why then a magician with a roof over his head and food was begging for alms in the temple, and she saw everything with her own eyes. The lady replied that she simply ate too much, and after that the villainess had no more censored words left. The elder mage not only forced her to work for free, but also took credit for her accomplishments and ultimately allowed Vivian to die of starvation. And yet, the simple opportunity to invent something made this unfortunate girl truly happy. Vivian admitted that it was only thanks to her teacher that she could explore whatever she wanted. Therefore, she can never betray him, because only he gave her the opportunity to invent. It was true, as a commoner, she simply had no choice but to rely on her master to survive. But that doesn't mean the villain is going to just ignore everything, and if she does, then Vivian will also just die of hunger one day. The lady did not want to go that far, but she understood that now a person's life depended on her choice. The villainess agreed if Vivian wanted it. She had no intention of stopping her, but she had something to offer. She handed her a small piece of paper and warned that if the girl had time, she could always come to a certain place. Also, if she ever wants to change her owner, she will need to find Belinda Blanche. The villain warned that, unlike her owner, she is kind and competent even in relation to obedient dogs. The next day, the lady prepared to give the boy a new task. It was very special, and only he could complete it. Having heard about the important task, Leo was serious and ready to do everything in his power. It seems that recently the boy has become more energetic, cheerful, and he is gradually beginning to get used to things. Belinda placed something with peacock feathers in the boy's hand, but he had no idea what it was. Leo laughed and thought he was given a broom with feathers to collect dust, but after that the heroine simply asked him to sit at the table. She decided that from that day on she would teach the boy to write words correctly, and they would also study etiquette. She asked Leo to watch and learn from her elegant handwriting, and as soon as the boy looked at those letters, he was delighted. After writing a few words, Belinda asked the boy to repeat after her, to show what he was capable of. Now Leo didn't even realize that the first word he would learn was his own name, but his handwriting was neat. Progress was in full swing. It was simply excellent, and the intelligence in the game immediately increased, because Leo learned to write and acquired the skills of elegant handwriting. The lady warned him that from now on he would learn 3 words every day and take a certain test at the end of each week. The villain smiled slyly and warned that she would hit the boy on the head, like last time, if he didn't do his homework. The next day, classes were over. The boy could do what he wanted. He immediately went to wash the floors. Belinda didn't understand how cleaning could make a little boy so happy, but the main thing now was for him to feel less stressed. The heroine decided to open the system window to see how much the little gentleman's skills had increased. The stress actually subsided, divine power increased, and stamina and intelligence also became high. Intelligence and divine power increased, but the heroine did not expect such a huge leap just because he learned to write. That day in front of the sacred sword, she had never asked Leo about his future plans and dreams before, because she knew better than anyone how fleeting a dream could be, especially when it comes from a child who couldn't rely on a single adult, and for Leo, a dream in itself could be an act of courage. So, to begin with, Belinda made an important decision, simply to help expand this huge, mysterious world for little Leo, slowly, step by step, until he himself realizes and decides what he really wants to achieve in this life. And when Leo would have his own dreams, his own desires, the heroine only dreamed that he would have enough strength to make them come true. To do this, Belinda wanted to increase 3 stats to the maximum. Stamina is easy, but increasing mana requires an assistant, and Vivian would be ideal for teaching magic. Perhaps now she is checking the map that the lady gave her. There was no other choice, and soon she will have to visit this magical tower herself. To begin with, Belinda decided to collect educational materials and went to the library to also pick up something for Leo. Her attention was drawn to a leather-bound book that told of the gifts that shaped the kingdom's history. Taking the book in her hands, Belinda slowly began to read the first pages, and at that very second she saw something incredible. This book had been in the library all this time, and the first thing Belinda decided to do was study it in more detail. In this world, there are creatures born with special gifts and abilities. Although they are extremely rare, they react to the world around them differently than ordinary people, and it is they who could change something in this world. For example, the noble lady Ophelia was one of these people, and her ability is called educator. Any creature that Ophelia showers her love and affection on, be it a plant or an animal, grows up to be amazingly healthy and special. But what she saw next amazed her most of all, because for some unknown reason, the book contained the family coat of arms of the Blanche house. This could only mean one thing: there was someone here with certain magical abilities, that which exists but is unknown to other eyes, that which does not know human language, that which has no will. This creature is worthy of being called the heir to the throne. The heroine had no idea what it all meant, but it sounded quite interesting. For her, it was still an impossible dream. They say that abilities are usually inherited, and they manifest themselves in early childhood. The book should definitely be enough to find out the missing information, and it was probably going to rain all night tonight. Belinda noticed a strange, dark figure in the hallway and decided that she needed to put Leo to bed as soon as possible. The dark figure of a young man was advancing straight towards her, but she definitely did not tell anyone to come upstairs until she called. And the biggest surprise of the evening was the meeting with her cousin, who had just approached the girl. Belinda didn't want to see Shouvel anymore. She had no idea why he was here. The young man suddenly asked how his sister's marriage business was going and laughed loudly. He had some papers in his hands, and Shouvel laughed. So many responses had come to her marriage proposal. He found out how she planned to divide the property later, and in his opinion, it was a surprisingly smart move, which was completely uncharacteristic for his sister. Something strange was happening. The girl began to tremble violently with fear, and Shouvel asked if she still thought she would be safe. Right now, Belinda wanted to run away from here as quickly as possible, but suddenly she felt that she couldn't move at all. Trying to breathe as deeply as possible, the heroine was still shaking, but she definitely shouldn't panic in front of this fool. She confidently stated that her brother talked too much for an uninvited guest, and she had never given him permission to enter her house. Shouvel only smiled sarcastically at these words, and he probably wanted to find out something else at such a late hour. He asked where that naughty boy was that she had been clinging to so much lately, and he was nowhere to be seen. He noticed that his sister had really become attached to the boy. They say she even feeds him sweets and dresses him in different clothes. He threw some letters in front of her and declared that his beloved little sister should definitely not forget one interesting fact. It was he who personally chose and sent this child for her, and the young man had been making selfish plans for a long time. He asked Belinda if she suspected that he, like her previous personal maids, was reporting to him about all her actions. Shouvel warned that even if this orphan was truly devoted to her, what about the man she would marry in the future? If the lady dies after inheriting the dowry, then all of it will go to her new husband, according to her brother. So he wanted to know if his little sister could really call this man her faithful ally. The young man maliciously warned her that she needed to learn to be careful around other people, but in reality it was so stupid that despite everything she had been through, she still continued to believe in humanity. Perhaps the heroine really did make some mistakes all this time, but she always trusted her heart. She thought the shivers running through her body were from disgust or anger towards her cousin, but it turned out that was not the case. Now she knew for sure that it was not a matter of disgust or anger at all, and in fact, every part of her body and every cell was incredibly afraid of this man. Shouvel grabbed Belinda by the face. She looked at him with her huge eyes, full of a mixture of fear and something else. All the problems in Belinda's life were definitely because of this scoundrel, who also dared to lay his dirty hands on her. The real reason why the past Belinda was actually so cruel to the boy was only for one thing. This was the very reason why she never decided to get married and did not connect her life with any respectable gentleman. In fact, the heroine could never trust anyone again, never in her life, the brother said maliciously. Could it be that the impudent Belinda suddenly lost the power of speech, and was she really so scared that she couldn't even speak? The crude insults she shouted every time she crossed paths with him were all just a bluff, and in reality Belinda was scared to death. Belinda didn't wait and hit Shouvel between the legs with her shoe, the sharp heel piercing the flesh like a scorpion's sting. Shouvel howled, doubling over as a sudden pain shot through him, his face twisted in a grimace of agony, his skin pale and covered in sweat. The rage that had been smoldering in the depths of her eyes now blazed like an open flame. She looked at Shouvel with contempt and disgust. She was clearly aware that the fear belonged only to Belinda, but she was not at all afraid of this brainless man, whom she immediately hit on the head with a book. Shouvel didn't expect such a reaction from her. He saw in her only a quiet, submissive girl, but now in front of him stood a fury, ready to do anything to protect herself. The outcome of this fight was unclear, but one thing was clear: Belinda was no longer a victim. She had become a warrior. After being hit by the book, blood dripped from Shouvel's head, staining the dusty floor with crimson drops. Shouvel came to his senses. Running his hand over the back of his head, he felt sticky liquid under his fingers. The pain was throbbing, but not fatal. Belinda remained silent, preparing herself for the worst. She knew that the consequences of her actions would be serious. At that moment, looking into Shouvel's evil eyes, she felt no regret. She protected herself, and that was the most important thing. The young man swung his fist with all his anger to hit his hated little sister, but the next second, for some reason, he stopped. The heroine laughed. Why couldn't her brother hit her? And what was to be expected from a half-breed? He still knows his place. The young man slowly lowered his hand. The lady asked him to listen to her right now very carefully, as much as his stupid head was capable of. Belinda warned that if she got even the slightest scratch on her body, she would immediately call the doctor and then tell him the whole truth. She will tell that this was done to her by her beloved, sweet elder brother, who can do nothing against his little sister, and in anger because of the dowry he raised his hand against her. As soon as her father's will was read, the lady was immediately sent to the old outbuilding. She was sure that everyone would immediately believe her words. Belinda made up a story that she had to live a lonely life here without any servants, as if she were not a relative of the Marquis at all. People are more interested in a story about a so-called victim suddenly turning into an aggressor than in the mundane and familiar story of a rude woman who caused a scandal. Belinda threw a white handkerchief on the boy's shoes and declared that he had been kind to her for quite a long time. So now he can't let his mask fall in a place like this, because it could damage his reputation. The villainess laughed. Because her no-good brother didn't even manage to kill her, she was sure that the truth would be on her side in this situation. The main character's synchronization level has increased dramatically. The heroine has received a reward for completing the task, and she has also received a fragment of memories. It finally happened, and Belinda thought she would have to sweat for a long time over the synchronization, but everything turned out to be much more successful. She even decided to say a huge thank you to her brother, because it was only because she had just spanked him that the synchronization was increased. Suddenly, quiet footsteps were heard in the room. The heroes turned around and saw a small, tiny figure in a dark corner. Belinda immediately realized who it was, and there was definitely no one else here except her and little Leo. The boy trembled with fear, confessing that all this time he had been waiting for his mistress for a long time, but she never returned. The lady understood that she needed to take the boy away as quickly as possible before the impudent brother began pestering him with questions. With all due care, she grabbed his hand to lead him as quickly as possible into another room. The boy hid behind her back, and Belinda glared at her brother, making it clear to him that he should under no circumstances approach the boy. As soon as Shouvel saw the boy, he laughed so loudly that his malicious laughter could be heard even in the yard. With each passing second, he laughed louder and louder, and in theory the role of the main villain was only suitable for him. The young man said that it seemed like the girl had acquired something valuable, and people become stronger when they have something they truly want to protect. Their meeting took place at the most inopportune time, and Shouvel turned to Leo and asked what his name was. Belinda, without turning her gaze from her villainous brother, warned that the boy should under no circumstances answer him. She was about to leave right now, showing different things, but her brother continued to look at her, expecting something more interesting. He gloated. Fortunately, Belinda had found something dear to her heart, because it becomes even dearer when they try to take it away. Holding Leo's hand tightly, the lady walked proudly forward so that her brother would never dare to catch up with them. Unfortunately, the young gentleman heard the entire conversation in detail, and some of the hostess's words made him think. He heard Belinda say something about her death, and he looked at his mistress with complete incomprehension, wanting to understand why she uttered those terrible words. The boy looked back and worried that he and that gentleman had really had such a big fight, or that he was clearly not in the mood right now. He felt her hand shaking very badly, and nothing like this had ever happened to the villainous mistress before. Leo held her hand even tighter, and he wanted to take care of his mistress and also protect her from such fools. With each passing second, he became more and more confident in himself, and in that case he decided that he would definitely protect Lady Belinda here. Now was the very moment when the heroine needed to be left alone, and she had just approached the cemetery. She didn't expect that Shouvel would meet Leo at such a moment, and now she would have to be even more careful about the young master's safety. And yet, back then, she was pretty cool, like she had finally managed to find her true calling, which she had never managed to discover in her past life. Who would have thought that she would agree to do for the role of the villain from the game, but looking at the cemetery, she decided that now was not the time to think about it. Now was the time to learn new tasks and call up the system window. She received a notification about a reward for completing a task, that very first task when it was necessary to find out who she was. The heroine remembered that it had definitely said that she would receive some kind of special reward, and she really hoped that it would be something useful. Belinda pressed the open button to finally receive her first prize, which she clearly deserved. She activated one of the memories of the past heroine and saw a small, red-haired girl standing in a huge hall full of aristocrats. People were whispering about an accident with a carriage that had happened quite recently, and they said that a poor child had been left all alone. People immediately discuss inheritance first and foremost. They are more interested in other people's lives than their own. Little Belinda didn't want to take part in this because her parents had only recently died, and she was already looked upon with disdain. She went out to get some fresh air on this rainy day, and suddenly she heard someone sobbing behind the bushes. There was indeed a man sitting there, crying desperately, all alone in the pouring rain. The little girl asked why the gentleman was crying so bitterly, but as soon as he turned around, he immediately became scared. He even jumped back some distance and screamed in surprise while a little girl with a black umbrella stood in front of him. The gentleman screamed. Right in front of him he saw a real ghost, and the little girl did not understand at all what was happening here. He continued to scream that he saw a real ghost, and even stopped crying from what he saw. The little girl sighed and admitted that there were no signs at all, and the gentleman was definitely mistaken. Only little children believe in such things, but in front of her sat a completely grown man. The gentleman admitted that these were not his tears, it was just a heavy rain, and he could call it whatever he wanted, but the little girl saw everything with her own eyes. She silently looked at the crying young man sitting in the bushes, but then decided that it was still worth talking to him. The little girl wanted to know if it was really her uncle sitting in front of her, but the gentleman clearly did not expect to hear such a question. He looked exactly like her father. It would be strange if she was wrong, but she was right. Her father was his older brother. Again, the young man could not think about this without tears, because his brother had died tragically, and the little girl was asking him to finally stop crying. She admitted that it was time for him to calm down, and for a moment it even seemed as if she was looking at her crying father right then. The gentleman's eyes were full of sadness and despair, but this little girl somehow lifted his spirits. The gentleman could not believe that his brother had left him, and the little girl continued to insist that crying was not too serious for an adult. Suddenly, large tears began to flow from her small, childish eyes, and she began to sob so loudly that the young man immediately fell silent. She threw a real tantrum and started calling for Mom and Dad, and this role now belonged only to her. They began to cry bitterly together. The little girl hugged her father's brother, and their tears flowed down their cheeks. Each of them was in dire need of support now, and in these green bushes, on the wet ground, they sat together. The young man offered to give the little girl a handkerchief so that she wouldn't choke on her own saliva after bitter tears. He asked for forgiveness. The girl had just seen a truly pathetic sight, but she understood his feelings perfectly. After all, no one else who came to the funeral ceremony cried because of her parents. So everything was fine. In this man, she saw some kind of support, a gentleman who could also sympathize with her about the loss. They sat in these bushes for several hours, calming each other down, but soon the heroes had to leave. The gentleman stood up from the wet, cold ground and admitted that it was time for him to go home right now. Gently stroking the baby's head, he asked her never to worry again, and that everything would definitely be fine for her in the future. The gentleman promised that they would definitely meet soon, and affectionately called the girl by the name Belle. A whole year had already passed since the girl's death. For the sake of the children, it became an important anniversary, and the little girl asked her uncle to become her guardian. The gentleman probably didn't expect such a proposal, and even spat the delicious tea back into his mug out of surprise. There were too many leeches around the baby right now, wanting to suck on her family's fortune, which is why she decided she needed a caregiver. What was needed was someone honest, someone who had no lust for money, someone who would not try to steal from the family, someone who loved her parents and would be kind to her in the future, someone she could easily rely on. So Belinda asked her uncle to become her legal father because he was the only man who had been kind and noble to her all year. The young man asked the maids to leave the dining room so that he could speak with the girl alone, and so that strange rumors would not spread throughout the mansion. He warned that the little girl couldn't just talk about such things, especially when someone could hear it. If the master became her legal father, she would also have to become the head of the house, which he definitely did not want. He couldn't do it, and it was hard for the gentleman to even imagine that he would have to take on the role of the main man of the family. It was simply enough for him that the little girl called him uncle, and they had a wonderful and warm relationship. And so, he found himself drawn into the whirlpool of someone else's drama, forced to decide the fate of his orphaned niece. Little Belinda began to cry loudly, her small body shaking with sobs, the air in the hall filled with bitter, desperate cries. Screaming loudly and waving her legs already on the floor, she begged her uncle to become her dad, but the young man understood perfectly well that everything was not so easy. The pain of loss was unbearable, and the prospect of being left an orphan, without love and support, seemed to her more terrible than anything in the world. A deep, all-consuming longing for her parents, whom she had lost so early, settled in her little heart. The gentleman stood up from his seat and approached the little sobbing girl in order to calm her down as quickly as possible. The uncle ran up to the little girl because if she continued to kick her legs like that, she might get hurt or hit herself. He carefully examined her legs to make sure she wasn't scratched anywhere and couldn't roll around on the floor like that, wanting to earn herself painful bruises. Uncle warned that next time she might be capricious on the soft bed, and he would wait until she spilled out her emotions, and then they could talk. He asked the little girl to listen to him carefully, and this time he really couldn't fulfill her request. The uncle already had a son, and if he officially became the girl's father, her rights to inheritance could be denied. Unfortunately, the little girl did not understand why he could not become her father, but her uncle caringly asked the girl to understand that this was all only for her own good. Belinda couldn't believe how happy she could be if her uncle refused to become her legal father. She started screaming with tears in her eyes, asking why he was so incredibly kind to her if he simply couldn't become her dad. When the baby was very sick, he was constantly nearby and sat next to her bed the whole night. He made sure to visit her every evening just to be near her and have dinner, and he also kissed her forehead every evening, wishing her sweet dreams. Belinda didn't understand why he made her so weak, because if it weren't for him, she would have learned to cope with everything on her own. The little girl was worried, all because she was a naughty girl, but even so, she still wanted to become his real daughter. The uncle wanted to take her hand to calm her down, but that day the girl was so angry that she could not cope with her emotions at all. She ran out of the dining room feeling humiliated and insulted, but at that time she simply didn't understand anything yet. She cried all night, either on her bed or somewhere, and just wanted her uncle to be her father. She was so angry that she promised the little stuffed bunny that she would never speak a word to her uncle again. The little girl felt like she was drowning in a sea of despair, and no one would come to her aid. She was crying in her room, and her uncle came to the door because he really wanted to calm the girl down so that she wouldn't worry. She didn't want to open up to him, so he started telling a story about how his wife once died while giving birth to his daughter. It was for this reason that the gentleman always thought of Belinda as his own daughter, whom he had once lost. And wasn't the warmth and care that he gave every day, every minute, for a whole year after the death of her parents enough for the little girl? All this time the gentleman stood near her room. He was sure that soon the little girl would definitely change her anger to mercy. And finally, that very intimate moment came, when the girl opened the door and looked at her uncle with tear-stained eyes. Belinda said that actually this really wasn't enough and she needed something else. She needed proof that she really was his daughter, and only then would the little girl finally be able to breathe a sigh of relief. Unfortunately, the uncle could not explain all the nuances of adult life now, and he was sure that the little girl simply would not be able to understand him. He knew very well that he could be the most wonderful guardian for her, but he was not sure that he could become a worthy father for her. In her defense, the girl could not say and promise that she would be a wonderful, sweet daughter, and that everything would definitely be fine between them. The girl really wanted her uncle to just become her dad, and she kept begging him to make her dream finally come true. She held him with her tiny hands and looked at him with sincere, childish eyes that were simply impossible to resist. The uncle smiled sweetly and asked what he should do now with such a sweet girl who so desperately pressed to become his daughter. Just a few days later, the uncle enthusiastically invited the little girl to look at the documents confirming that he had become her legal guardian. From that moment on, they were officially a family, but the girl didn't have to worry, and the place of the official heir to the family would still belong to her. It was simply incredible, the girl could not believe it, and with great gratitude she rushed to hug her beloved uncle. They hugged each other tightly. The happiest smiles in the world appeared on the heroes' faces, and the master was most happy that the little girl decided to become his daughter. Remembering those sweet, sweet moments, full of warmth and love, Belinda was standing right now next to the tombstone of her fake father. Now she has managed to learn about the villain's memories from when she was still just a child. She carefully took off her necklace, which she had worn all her life, and the pendant hanging around her neck had great significance. The gilded pendant contained a small round photograph and also had a sweet inscription, "My dear was," and this inscription belonged to my uncle. These emotions and feelings belonged to the past heroine, and Belinda tried not to cry from the grief that still pierced this body. The young gentleman suddenly appeared right behind her, and he seemed to sense that the heroine was about to burst into tears right then and there. It seems she had been gone for too long, and even Leo had already gone out to look for her to make sure that the lady was okay. She just looked at him, but the boy suddenly ran in the other direction and asked the lady to wait a minute. Belinda didn't even understand whether she really looked so menacing that the young gentleman was again frightened by her evil appearance. With tiny legs, he ran along the paved path as if he wanted to do something very important. It turned out that Leo ran to get a handkerchief and offered the lady to wipe away her tears with it, seeing that she was crying. At first, Belinda didn't understand what tears they were talking about, why the boy rushed for a handkerchief. But she really felt a hot tear on her cheek, and she didn't even notice when she started crying, and these emotions belonged to a real heroine. The tears belonged to Lady Belinda, the main villain, who loved her adopted father incredibly. Leo was definitely very worried when he saw the lady crying, because these were the first tears he saw on her face. This child was simply inimitable, and the villainess affectionately patted the boy on the head, admitting that dust had simply gotten into his eyes. She promised to take care of this handkerchief and keep it carefully as a gesture of kind attention. But Leo, as it turned out, had borrowed this white handkerchief from a guest, and it would soon need to be returned. Belinda didn't understand which guest they were talking about. At that moment, a young man approached them and asked them not to return the dots, and that everything was in order. That guest turned out to be Mr. Allen, whom they had seen just recently, and who proposed a fictitious marriage to the heroine. For some reason, he was here again, and admitted that he would like the lady to give him just a minute of her free time. They sat down in the living room to talk, and the heroine again wanted to find out why Allen had come to her again. The young man arrived to hear the lady's answers to his master's proposal once again, since last time she had not given such a specific answer. His lordship said that they should give priority to any conditions Lady Belinda wished. Until she transfers ownership of the mine, she may have certain privileges. On the day Alan paid a visit, the heroine explored the mine to find out what the Archduke's true intentions might be. It is said that this mine is the only one on the continent where high-quality magic stones can be mined. The lady reported, as Sir Fenedon probably already knows, that somewhere in the area of the mine there is a gate that is connected to the demonic world. Right there, in the depths of the mine, there is a dark portal that leads to a completely different world. The demonic energy emanating from these places transforms surrounding creatures and demonic beasts, and the exchange forms magical stones from ordinary minerals. That's why the Blanche family grants special rights to the mining rights of the stones to the Valwachten house, who are experts in hunting demonic creatures. They also made a profit by selling magical and ordinary stones throughout the kingdom. Unlike the Blanche family, the Valwachten are hermits, so they could not control all the trade throughout the kingdom. The lady warned that the Duke had not even secured a way to sell himself, so she wondered why he wanted to take complete control of the mine. The gentleman also could not answer this question. He turned out to be a tough nut to crack, as expected from a venerable knight. In a normal situation, the villain would have simply thrown him out, but her brother's behavior had recently begun to be very worrying. Usually, Belinda's life in the game ended due to various accidents that she was not even aware of. Previously, she thought that this was how players wanted to show an ending in which good always triumphs over evil, but were these cases actually simple given the circumstances? They needed a supporter who could protect her, who had enough power to stand up to her brother, but who also had to be a powerful aristocrat so that Blanche's house would not dare to help them. Besides this, it would be great if he could provide her with a knight who would also accompany the lady, and this gentleman is her only option. The villain decided to get one item from the golden box that would help her find out the whole truth. She put her glasses on her face and admitted that since his lordship was so fired up by the idea, it was probably time for her to look at the contract. She had access to special glasses, a lie detector, a recommended item for raising a star hero who had reached puberty. Yes, this is the very reward that she received along with the fragment of Belinda's memory, glasses that can recognize any lie. And it was one of all the items that was in the inventory by default, and the set of such items was called a good child. When the lady played the game, she never used this thing because it questions any human rights, but now the matter is of a completely different nature. If she does this right now, to find out if this man standing in front of her can even be trusted. She asked him various questions and observed how the lie detector responded to his answers. A display appeared above the gentleman's head, which looked very much like a cardiogram monitor, showing a cardiogram. Belinda decided to ask again for what specific purpose their house wanted to get the mine with its magical stones. By doing so, he will also close off a source of enormous profit, but it is likely that a completely different intention is hidden here. His lordship wanted to seal the mine. The mining process is incredibly complex, but this place is like a goose laying expensive eggs. While answering, the heroine carefully watched the lie detector, and it did not seem like this man was lying to her face. The next question was too tricky, and the lady asked if the Archduke was really the kind of person who might one day kill for money. And even that answer turned out to be true, and even the question of whether he is a womanizer also turned out to be true. For some reason, the young man was telling the truth and nothing but the truth, and the villainess began to suspect whether these glasses were working or whether the cheese was simply too strong and the glasses couldn't work on it. She decided to ask the most important question, which could bring clarity to the full picture of the Archduke. The heroine decided to find out if it was true that he had dealt with his family and thus inherited the high title. The gentleman was in no hurry to answer this and wanted to know why the lady decided to ask about this. Belinda was already happy. Alan was finally caught, and now he wouldn't be able to tell the whole truth. At first, the young man fell silent and lowered his head, probably thinking about something, how to present the next lie. But Belinda was very surprised when he decided to answer that it was the whole truth, and the gentleman had never been more honest with her. All this time, the villain was closely monitoring the lie detector to understand what kind of double game this man could be playing. Suddenly, red lines appeared on the detector, and now, something finally became clear to her. On a dark, gloomy evening, Mr. Allen stood by the huge window in his room with a silver cage next to him. He carefully removed his mask, placing it on a chair, and he could only do this in his own home. He remembered the lady's question. It was true that the Duke had dealt with his family and thus received the title. This question still made him uneasy, and Alan was still hiding sinister secrets that no one knew. He felt this anger, his own, seething inside, reflected in the dark beauty of the passing day. Alan looked up at the sky, trying to find a spark of light among the crimson clouds, but the darkness was thickening, creeping slowly but inexorably, threatening to swallow him whole. And Alan knew that he had to make a choice to give up or keep fighting, a choice that would determine his fate, a choice that might already have been made. In a silver cage sat a bird made of iron parts, and it was alive. The whistle of gears, the measured ticking of springs, the faint smell of machine oil. This is the symphony of her existence. The gentleman opened the cage, and the little iron bird opened its tiny eyes, making a sound. The mystery of this mechanical bird, alive in defiance of all the laws of nature, has excited the minds of scientists and alchemists, adventurers and crazy inventors. Her graceful wings, folded from delicate plates, sometimes trembled, as if in anticipation of a flight she could only dream of. The bird loudly asked why the gentleman had only just arrived. He probably had no idea how worried she had been. The bird bowed to its creator, and there was absolutely no point in ever arguing with the master. The bird hoped that everything was fine with him. She appeared here on behalf of his lordship. Now she has to climb a mountain of this paperwork every single day. But thanks to the master, she had a dream she wanted to be born a nobleman for the last time in her life, and have a subordinate like him whom she could command. The little bird just decided to ask, just in case, if there was a time when the gentleman could rest properly. He probably couldn't even imagine how wonderful it would be to spend a year alone and do nothing, just rest until mold appeared on his body and fungi sprouted. The bird heard only ominous silence in response. The gentleman stated that he had recently found an important job. He also managed to get engaged to a nice lady, which the little iron bird certainly didn't expect. She opened her tiny eyes incredibly wide as soon as the gentleman announced that he was going to get married soon. It was completely unclear what was going on here, and the bird specially sent its master on vacation so that he could finally rest. Even back then, when the previous Marquis Blanche verbally promised to transfer the mine to him, it did not seem like such a difficult task, but due to the Marquise's sudden death before he could sign the contract, the mine became Lady Blanche's wedding dowry. He had to seal this mine as quickly as possible so that whatever was inside, in its depths, could never get out. The little iron bird had a bad feeling about this, and if something terrible were to happen, she would immediately head to the capital. Alan asked him to stop talking nonsense and to take a closer look at Lady Belinda, who was to become his mistress in the future. Hearing about Lady Blanche, the bird thought for a long time, as if it could not call this an excellent option. The girl is over 2 meters tall and has a massive build. She can also catch demonic creatures with one hand and drive away enemies with the light emanating from her eyes. Many have tried to guess the ideal type for Mr. Allen, but this description does not exactly fit him. The gentleman heard that this description fits his ideal type. If he meets such a lady in the capital, he will definitely arrange a wedding for his little assistant. Alan touched the main gear with his finger, and the little bird asked him to wait just a minute. As he touched the main gear on her chest, the little bird slowly closed its eyes and fell into a deep sleep. The gentleman did this on purpose so that the long-awaited pleasant silence would finally arrive, and he could think calmly. Until recently, Alan did not even imagine that he would be able to get married, and he had never even thought about anything like that. Lady Blanche is the woman they call the greatest villain in the kingdom, he heard. She is so heartless that she did not even show up at the funeral of the Marquis. The woman he met was nothing like the rumors, in a dilapidated building without a single normal servant, and in no way extravagant. She was completely alone, mourning the death of her family. There are times when rumors diverge from reality, but now this gap turned out to be too incredible and unrealistic. Alan assumed that someone was deliberately spreading vicious rumors about the lady and wanted to put her in the most unpleasant light. From that moment, he decided to closely monitor the situation. The next day, the young man presented the lady with the terms of the marriage contract, and the lady carefully studied every detail. She tried to find at least something incomprehensible here, but the document was really not that badly drawn up. Belinda asked Alan if he had previously said that royal approval for a marriage takes about 6 months, as expected from a ducal house in which royal blood also flows, and all these procedures are too complicated. The heroine still couldn't leave until Ophelia appeared, and until then she was going to play the role of a capital city bride with responsibility. One important point was added to the contract: the Duke must guarantee her personal safety from the moment the contract comes into force until the dissolution of the marriage. And the person who will protect her in the capital is probably Mr. Allen, who just recently announced that he plans to stay here for a while. The gentleman said that he was given a short vacation, which means that he should be completely free, according to the terms of the contract. The lady declared that she was not satisfied with any other knight, to be honest. A more worthy person could not be found, and Shouvel certainly would not be able to incite him in any way. Alan wondered if the lady had already considered other knights, even though they hadn't even signed the main contract yet. It's a pity, of course, that he won't be able to work for the heroine during his vacation, but that's how the world works, where you shouldn't expect anything. She was gladly ready to accept this knight and choose him, because she felt that this man was not very simple. The Villainess asked if the gentleman would be bored just being with her like this, since he probably had enough to do. It just so happened that her servant had been looking very exhausted lately, as if he was starving, so she offered to teach him how to use a sword as a form of entertainment. At first, the young man asked her to sign a contract. The heroine was indignant. Did he really just not want to do anything? From that moment on, she officially appointed Mr. Allen as her personal knight, as well as her swordsmanship instructor. She was ready to trust him with her life, and from that moment on, the two unfamiliar heroes had to be together and fulfill common conditions. A week later, life in the mansion went on as usual, and little Leo was training enthusiastically with the Lord. Early in the morning, he would run out to the sports ground to pick up his wooden sword and swing it in different directions. It was quite difficult for the kid, even though the sword was just wooden and didn't have a lot of weight. Leo turned to the gentleman knight and confessed that the sword was so heavy that he could not lift it at all. As Coach Allen encouraged the boy, he was absolutely wrong and just suddenly lost his balance. He said that first of all, it was necessary to correct his posture so that he could handle the sword comfortably. During the training, the young master kept glancing at his mistress, and somewhere deep down he was incredibly grateful to her. The boy trained diligently under the supervision of an experienced knight, while Belinda watched closely. As expected from her boy, he shows interest in the sword and also listens attentively to his trainer. Perhaps it would be a good idea to choose a future in which Leo becomes a respected knight, and perhaps even be enrolled in the Royal Academy. They say that if you study with the commander of the Royal Knights, you can master swordsmanship in just 2 weeks, but Leo has a long way to go to reach a high level. Belinda was well aware of this and saw how the boy worked hard during training. Mr. Allen suggested that they finish training for today and asked the boy not to forget what he had taught him and to continue trying in the same spirit. The system window reported that the hero's star had mastered basic sword techniques and his stamina had immediately increased. The numbers were somehow too huge, and Belinda, jumping up from the table, did not understand what had just happened. The basic ball handling Leo was taught was supposed to be mastered in 3 weeks at the earliest. Only then could one become a sword master, but he completed it in just a week. And all thanks to the man in the mask, who diligently trained the boy every day to learn all the basics of this art. With each passing day, the Villainess became less and less sure who this Allen was, but suddenly a maid appeared behind her. The lady did not expect to be called so suddenly, and said that she was busy at the moment, but the maid came to announce the arrival of a guest. A guest had arrived from the tower, and the maid needed to find out whether he should be refused, but Belinda certainly wasn't expecting any guests. As soon as she heard about the tower, she smiled a villainous smile, wondering if Vivian herself had decided to visit it. There was nothing to be done about it. She decided to question the gentleman later, and she herself asked him to take her to the guest, whom she was going to greet properly. The knight and the young master went to the mansion to take care of other important matters. But Leo had some questions, and he turned to Sir Knight with apprehension, and could not contain his astonishment. He called his name Rat, and the knight was surprised that such a sweet boy could have such a strange name. Leo thought for a long time, and finally decided to ask how he could become as strong and skilled as the gentleman knight. For Allen, this child seemed somehow strange. An ordinary person would have long been afraid of the damned one, but the boy, on the contrary, felt respect for him. He didn't even show the slightest sign of fear, and looked the gentleman straight in the eyes. No one had ever been able to stand in front of this man with such confidence before the young man asked if he was not afraid of him at all. The boy did not understand his question and was perplexed as to why he should be afraid of a man who had done absolutely nothing to him. The knight asked to focus on shaping his body, eat well and not be picky, and also to get enough sleep every day and train hard so that one day he would become strong. He was sure that one day the boy would become a good knight, and Leo seemed to have a new dream that he had never thought about before. For some reason, Leo didn't want to become a knight, he wanted to become the most responsible and dexterous servant. The knight decided to ask if the little boy's dream was really to become just a servant in a huge house. He knelt down in front of him on one knee. He saw that the boy was incredibly worried, as if she wanted to tell him something. He folded his little hands and whispered in the knight's ear that as soon as he grew up, his life would change. After this, he will protect Lady Belinda with all his might, and she will never be in danger again. The gentleman's eyes widened in surprise because he could not believe that a little boy's dream could be so grown up. Yes, this child will definitely soon become the happiest person on earth, and this could be understood from his adult position, and not because he wants to become a knight, but he already has an honest and brave heart. The lady was preparing to meet the guest and confidently went out into the main hall to greet him. In front of her stood that same girl in the dress, and Vivian definitely didn't appear in this house for no reason. Noticing her condition, the heroine noticed that her face did not look like the face of a living person, she looked like a walking corpse. Vivian was incredibly saddened and asked how much the lady knew of the information she had spoken of at the very beginning. The game featured Vivian twice in total, and there was even talk about the unfortunate genius mage's final regret. If you complete this game, you can get a rough map of one warehouse, and after receiving this map, a new quest related to it will be unlocked for the player. It was in the process of interacting with this guest that the Villainess finally realized something important for herself. Unfortunately, the noble Vivian did not die of starvation, but of the immense and overwhelming guilt she had felt all her life. Probably the girl still decided to go to the place that the lady told her about at the last meeting. The map the villain gave last time led to a warehouse where a magical item called Cecil's lullaby is kept. Vivian probably considered her question and spent a long time thinking about how to act correctly in this situation. She asked the lady how much she knew and what other valuable information she could provide. Cecil's lullaby was an early work of Vivian's, and Belinda revealed that her master was using the potion for less than good intentions, which is why she hadn't slept for several days. She realized that the lady knew much more than she had imagined, and all her words turned out to be true. Cecil's lullaby is a magical potion that Vivian developed for her elderly grandmother, who one day lost her memory. If you drink this potion and fall asleep, you can see the happiest memories of the past in your dreams. The girl just wanted to finally give her old grandmother some peace so that she would never have to experience suffering again. Vivian would have fainted if she had known about the future that the lady knew, because she designed all her products exclusively for good intentions. She can't even imagine that a beautiful honey-colored potion that gives you sweet dreams can become a dangerous substance if you add a sleeping pill to it. Some people were sure that if you drink this potion, you can forget all the pain that a person went through. In the original story, Vivian's owner secretly sold a modified version of this potion in the slums. And about halfway through the game, mass deaths among people begin, which is why everyone began to say that Cecil took everyone away, and the potion spread incredibly quickly throughout the kingdom. The lady assumed that Vivian had a clear idea of why she had decided to reveal the whole truth to her. Vivian really understood everything, which is why she decided to turn to the villain to help her. The heroine offered this option if Vivian wanted to leave the magic tower and work for her. In return, she would give her everything she wanted. The lady couldn't understand why the Empire's biggest villain could become so kind and offer such favorable conditions. Vivian looked so confused and didn't understand why the lady decided to be so kind to me. Naturally, she was simply scared. It was a natural reaction. She had already been betrayed by the teacher whom she had sincerely trusted her whole life. So the heroine asked if she really thought that this was just a favor and that every effort should be repaid. The Villainess asked the lady if she had any idea how much the cup she was holding in her hands was worth, and it was a whole 300 gold pieces. For Vivian, this was a huge amount of money, enough to live on for 4 years, covering all her expenses and living a comfortable life. Blanche's family, who have managed to accumulate mountains of gold, very easily recognized the pearl among all the dirt. So, thanks to her family, the lady had very discerning eyes, but this was a common lie, and the lady lived like a commoner, so she would never recognize a premium item. That is why all of this could only be portrayed as an investment and not as a simple provision of services. The villain's hobby is finding valuable things that no one has yet recognized, growing them and then showing them to the whole world, as happened with baby Leo. Vivian couldn't understand why she was special, because all her life she considered herself ordinary. The villainess said, did she really mean to say that her piercing eyes were mistaken? This definitely could not be. On the one hand, Vivian believed in her own strength, but without her teacher she would feel worthless. And the villain had no idea how the lady was going to survive, with such low self-esteem, and how many times she had to listen to humiliation. Her original goal was to obtain the source of all existence, but she felt too sorry for the girl to simply leave her to her fate. Therefore, the heroine stated that the girl should know her worth, and if she refuses her offer this time, such offers will definitely not come again. This will not solve anything, after which she will return to her tower, refuse food and water, and lie there with an enormous feeling of guilt. One day, Vivian will gather some courage and tell her master that she is against selling this potion. And yet, Vivian must understand how it will all end. This worthless creature will renounce his assistant without giving her a single coin. Eventually, the lady will be unable to overcome hunger and cold, and will die a painful death in front of the great temple. The villain described exactly the ending she saw in the future, and asked the girl what outcome she wanted. For Vivian, this future was very real, and she was well aware of it, because she had no weight in this story. It wasn't even a lie or an exaggeration. It was Vivian's real ending in the game that the heroine came to. The villain was not a very generous person, but she warned that she nevertheless wanted to give the girl another chance. She prayed that Vivian would think twice right now, because she wasn't doing this with bad intentions. The girl was deep in thought. Her expression was saddened, as if she had no idea what to do next in this life. After some thought, the lady admitted that if the mistress helped her, she would do anything she asked her to do. Once again, Vivian was about to step on the same rake, and the villain called her stupid, saying that the girl should not value herself so lowly. Vivian, unfortunately, had long since become accustomed to being worthless. She was afraid of everything and had no confidence at all. The lady nervously clutched the hem of her dress, crumpling the dark fabric, and her palms sweated more and more. Right now, the worthless Vivian was about to turn into a true self-confident magician, and she finally said that if the villain could stop the supply, she would create the magical device she wanted as payment. The task was completed. The magician admitted that the invention was being used for other purposes, and the villain needed to get rid of the fake lullaby. The lady rang the bell, and at that moment servants appeared before them. They brought many delicious, fragrant dishes to the table. The villainess smiled sweetly and said that first the girl should be fed until she was completely full, and only then would all the issues be resolved. Vivian devoured the delicious treat with gusto and wondered what the villain was going to do with Cecil's lullaby. Now, unlike in the original story, the potion was just beginning to spread throughout the slums, and they still had plenty of time. And it seemed like now was the perfect time to catch some rats. Standing on the balcony, the maids noticed how carriages from expensive boutiques drove into the courtyard. They assumed that the lady was throwing money away recklessly, and because of her, the cook's hands were already falling off from preparing meat dishes 3 times a day. The ladies from the shops came to the lady with great honor, and it seemed that the head of the house was busy preparing for the inheritance. The girls introduced themselves politely. They were ready to serve the venerable lady and fulfill all her whims. The ladies saw for the first time that very villain Belinda, about whom every inhabitant of the empire talks. The self-confident appearance of the graceful lady evoked admiration and also great respect. One of the girls started to tell something about her boutique, but the lady angrily waved her fan and ordered her to be silent. She pointed her fan at the Viva and asked everyone to listen carefully, because they had to sew a complete wardrobe for this poor gluttonous magician. Yes, whoever can find the outfit that suits her best will be able to receive a reward from the villain. If she is not satisfied with something, the ladies will regret it for the rest of their lives, and the villain explained verbatim what she expects from them. The ladies thought that if they took advantage of this opportunity, they could rise to the top among other boutiques and earn even more respect. Now it was necessary to find out what style Vivian prefers, whether she has a favorite color, and what kind of things she wants in general. The girl couldn't answer any of these questions because she always wore rags, and now some ladies were trying to take her measurements. Vivian screamed. She didn't need new clothes, this was too much, and only asked to let the mistress go. The villainess was surprised. Was she really suggesting to continue to walk around in rags? How would the mistress look when they appeared together in public? She asked to simply do what she said, and reminded them once again that all this was being done not for her sake, but for the sake of the success of her own mistress. For a long time, the ladies worked hard, took measurements, selected fabrics, and colors that would perfectly suit the red-haired girl. After several hours, Vivian lay on the floor completely exhausted. It was incredibly tiring for her. While the lady was choosing outfits for her from the catalog, the girl was only thinking about how this horror could end as quickly as possible. Belinda looked at the recording that Vivian made yesterday, and there was nothing special in it, and it was all quite easy. The process was absolutely simple, and it was really very easy to prepare if you had the necessary ingredients. She still didn't understand how such a simple recipe could be addictive. But more importantly, who is this Cecil mentioned in the title, about whom absolutely no one knows anything? Suddenly, one of the girls screamed loudly throughout the room, and the heroines turned in her direction to see what had happened. It turned out that the seamstress had simply pricked herself with a needle and declared that she was perfectly fine, and there was nothing to worry about. The young lady looked at the villain with a smile, as if she wanted to tell her something. But at that moment, another lady approached her and slapped the girl on the back of the head with all her might, so that she would not relax at her workplace. It was her daughter, who was working in front of such an important person for the first time, and therefore the young lady was incredibly nervous. The lady stated that her daughter usually does not behave so carelessly and does her job carefully. In front of her stood Marilyn from the Bluebird Boutique, and the lady was getting ready to talk to this lady. Behind her stood her lady, that very child, and this beautiful girl's name was Thierry. This girl was quite experienced in sewing clothes. She did her job every time without any worries, and all the clients were incredibly happy with her. Belinda looked at all the outfits and immediately liked one. She asked the others to finish their work so that everyone could get paid. The ladies thanked the lady for the profitable deal, and the villainess asked if the seamstresses offered men's clothing. With the skill of these ladies, she would be happy to look at male models, but unfortunately her husband is currently ill and on vacation. The lady asked Viven to have dinner at a restaurant this evening, so she warned the girl that she needed to get ready. Vivian really appreciated the concern. She was sure that now was not the best time, but the villain only asked not to spoil her mood. The dark night enveloped the huge mansion, and it was the perfect time for the man in the black robe to mysteriously find out something. Unlike the main castle, the annex had much less light, which was just what the stranger needed. He carefully examined the mansion and saw an open window on the second floor, deciding that this would be the best option to get inside. The stranger needed to get into the building that night, and he had probably been working on his plan for a long time. He deftly climbed to the second floor and entered through an open window. Fortunately, no one noticed him at all in the darkness of the night. Looking around carefully, the man realized that there was no one in the room and that things were going just fine. The stranger in the black cloak assumed that the thing he was looking for must definitely be somewhere here. Finally, that treasured piece of paper appeared in my hands, and now it was necessary to read the contents. Suddenly, someone called her Cecil, asking if she really needed this recipe so much that she was willing to sneak in here at night. This meant that he had been caught, and now she had only one way out to escape through the window as quickly as possible. The villain warned that this girl must not be killed under any circumstances, and that she was needed alive. She asked all the courtiers to be quiet, so as not to let Leo wake up, and the knight listened to her order. This girl assumed that there was definitely a knight behind the main villain Belinda, but she didn't expect to see this particular person. A courageous gentleman stood before her, wearing a black, mysterious mask, and in this dark gloom he looked truly threatening. His eyes sparkled with a cold blue gleam. It seemed like he was ready to kill her right on the spot. That's why, Out of fear, the lady raised her hands up and screamed. She was ready to surrender if only no one would touch her with a finger. In her hands, she held a small piece of paper with the recipe for the potion written on it, but now she was caught red-handed, and there was nowhere to retreat. The villainess grinned and asked if the girl had really come all this way to finish the dress she had started. Taking off her black hood, the very same girl, Thierry, who had sewn the best dress chosen by the villainess, appeared before her, and she was probably now in complete despair, standing before the lady with the stolen recipe for the potion right in her house.